notice as possible so teachers can get ready. Schools were the last to close. Schools will very much be the first to open.
Homeschooling to last beyond the Easter holidays, we're told, as legislation to allow councils to lock down is extended until July.
The new variant, the variant that was first identified in London and the South East, may be associated with a higher degree of mortality.
Meanwhile, reports this morning suggest the government will force travellers into the UK to isolate in hotels for 10 days in order to catch any new variants at the borders. With vaccination numbers rattling along, is there any end to lockdown in sight? Do you think mid-February will be the moment people shun lockdown?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 10 o'clock, Matt Hancock has warned the government is a long way from being able to lift coronavirus lockdown restrictions in England. The Health Secretary says the rules in place are having an impact, but case numbers remain too high. He suggested schools could still reopen by Easter. But Mr Hancock says it's vital everyone continues to take a precautionary approach to the virus.
There is early evidence that the lockdown is starting to bring cases down, but we're a long way from being low enough, because the case rate was incredibly high, and you can see the pressure on the NHS. You can see it every day.
People who've had a COVID-19 jab are being warned to avoid the risk of continuing to spread the virus. England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Professor Jonathan Van Tam, says it's not yet clear if the vaccine breaks the chain of infection. He's urged those who've been inoculated to follow social distancing rules. Dr Penny Ward is visiting Professor in Pharmaceutical Medicine at King's College London.
There aren't many vaccines that do, in fact, interrupt transmission of infectious disease. What they mostly do is protect the individual from developing severe disease and needing hospital care and even dying from the disease itself.
11 workers have been rescued after 2 weeks trapped inside a gold mine in China. The workers were hauled up one by one in baskets following an explosion near the entrance of the site in Shandong province. The condition of another 10 people stuck underground remains unclear. Forecasters say disruption from snow and ice is likely to continue into next week. A band of snow is moving through Wales and central and southern England, prompting a number of weather warnings. It follows flooding in some parts of the country. John Fraser is head of highways at Worcestershire County Council.
The weather is doing its best to throw everything it can at us. Challenging times, but our gritters and snowplows are out across the county at the moment. We are warning drivers to avoid anything but essential travel.
Today, that's sleet and snow across Northern Ireland, Wales and southwest England, moving further east, staying bright and chilly in most other areas, a high of 5 Celsius. From Global's newsroom, I'm Thomas Watts.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster.
Just gone 10. Very good morning to you. You're listening to Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC. I'm Tom Swarbrick. Hope we find you very well this wintry morning. On the show, the Disunited Kingdom poll across the UK reveals that the majority in both Scotland and Northern Ireland do now support a referendum on UK membership in the next 5 years, with the SNP suggesting they could ignore the Westminster government and hold their own in-out referendum anyway. As well as in independent Scotland in the next 10 years, a majority of voters in Northern Ireland now believe that reunification could happen in the next decade. Is the UK finished? Northern Ireland First Minister Arlene will join me live. Also this morning, what hope for the Olympics and the Euros? A festival of sport in the summer is obviously COVID dependent. We'll speak to the chair of the British Olympic Association.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Very good morning to you. So here's the good news. Vaccinations are continuing at an astonishing rate. Nearly 5.5 million people have had the jab, more than 400,000 shots given in one day. This is by far the fastest rate of jabbing anywhere in Europe. It is not far off the best in the world. If you have had the jab, what a relief it must be. The government does look set now to reach the target of the top 4 groups being vaccinated by the middle of February, which of course would be a terrific achievement. That's where the good news ends, I'm afraid, because even once we reach that target, lockdown doesn't look set to ease at all, despite 88% of coronavirus deaths being in those top 4 age brackets. If you were hoping to see your child head back to the classroom after February half-term, I'm afraid you're going to have to think again. Reports this morning that classes won't return until late April at the earliest, with the embattled Education Secretary Gavin Williamson set to announce more information for parents this week. And Number 10 source saying in the papers, we will not risk coming out of this lockdown if there is any risk that we will be plunged into another. Meanwhile, The Telegraph reports that councils have been given lockdown powers until July. The law quietly extended in the last few weeks, but has now been extended until July the 17th this year. That is around the date when school summer holidays begin. Surely we can't be having any restrictions left by then. And then there's the border, with reports that the Cabinet is now split on whether all travellers or just those from certain countries should be forced into hotels to quarantine for 10 days once they arrive on these shores. Ministers say this measure would be temporary, but it's hard to see how it would be removed while the threat of a new vaccine-busting variant around the world remains, and that could remain for some time to come. How long can we go on like this? And how long can we go on like this when vaccinations are really working? I wonder whether you think lockdown fatigue is a much greater risk this time, particularly as millions are being vaccinated and the risk, presumably, of the NHS collapsing is lowered? Or is it worth driving the case rates down to as close to zero as possible, even if that means months and months of lockdown restrictions? 0345 6060 973 84850 to text. You can tweet at LBC. We started with the good news. I'm afraid if you're a parent who is desperate for their child to get back into the classroom, it's pretty bleak this morning. Let's get into it. Lord Andrew Lansley joins us, former Health Secretary, former Leader of the House of Commons and Conservative Life peer. Thank you for being there for us this morning, Lord Lansley. Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, saying we are a long way from the infection rates being low enough to come out of lockdown. How much longer can this continue, do you think?
Good morning, Tom. The short answer is it has to continue until we've reached the point at which the case numbers are sufficiently low that the pressure on the NHS has eased enormously. And we can't really relax anything until that point. And, you know, to be fair to Matt Hancock, look at the situation he's in. I can understand it. He's got a National Health Service which is absolutely at its limit of capacity. We've got 4,000 people on ventilators in intensive care. We've got 38,000 people in intensive care. And I must say, one of the things I was hearing, which I think really brings it home to one, is the average age of people in intensive care is 60. So although the risk of mortality rises with age, many of those people in the over 50s are potentially at risk of severe illness and, of course, of long COVID consequences. So, answer: how long is it? I mean, you know, is there a roadmap out of lockdown? I don't suppose there is, actually. You know, it'd be touching to think there's somebody who has the answers, but they don't have them. The truth is, you know, where are we at the moment? We're at alert level 5. Do you remember the alert level went up? We're at alert level 5, meaning the NHS is at risk of being overwhelmed. Last year, we relaxed restrictions when we were still at alert level 3, and the consequences, I think, were damaging. We should get to alert level 2, meaning the virus is no longer in general circulation. And of course, at that point, test and trace becomes a really effective instrument because you can find each outbreak and tackle it. You can have local lockdowns, but a national lockdown is going to last until May. You know, it's got to really, hasn't it? But well, why would it not? Because the earliest, probably the first relaxation will be to get children back to school. I mean, I completely understand that. I've got a year 11 and a year 13 here at home, you know, who are doing I think the teachers are doing a fantastic job. Yeah. You know, they're on the call at 8:45 in the morning and they finish at 4:30 and they do a full set of lessons.
You're right.
But it's not the same.
And more kids are going into school now than they were back in March. So there are more children in classrooms, so they're having to go in a lot more. Yeah. Just to come back to the strategy of this.
Yeah.
Go on, Andrew, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, when will we have vaccinated all of the over 50s? The short answer is probably not until the end of March. So Easter gives you an absolute point. The risk, of course, is that we get to Easter, we have done those vaccinations for the over 50s, but the pressure on the NHS hasn't abated because there's a time lag between the number of cases that we're experiencing and the pressure on the NHS. That's what makes me think we're looking at late April rather than Easter.
I wonder if the calculation... the calculation at the last lockdown was exactly as you say, get cases down to relieve the pressure on the NHS, and then we'll see where we are in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and we'll go from there. The calculation has changed this time because of the vaccination. So the vaccination allows for certainly those top 4 groups by the middle of February to come out of the pool of risk. I just wonder if there is a real danger here that if the government allows expectations to get to the point where people think, start of March, 88% of the death risk has been removed, therefore restrictions ought to start coming off. And we see some of your former colleagues, Conservative MPs, saying that is the point, early March is the point when we need to start getting schools back. Do you think that people run the risk of expectations being too high for lockdown easing at around that time? And therefore, whether breaking of lockdown, people just going, I'm sorry, but I'm not putting up with this. I'm okay with the level of risk that is posed right now with those number of people being vaccinated, just saying, well, I'm not following any restrictions anymore. Thank you very much.
Yeah, there is a risk of that. Of course there is. But I think what we have to do, of course, is to recognise the risk to people who are not in their 70s and 80s, but are in their 50s and 60s. Now, but that does, of course, change the calculation will change, but I think it can't possibly change until we've actually achieved the vaccination of at least the...
At what point do we answer the question about, are you worried about the risk with no, not really? Because you could say, well, what about those over 40? What about those over 30? There is still a greater risk to those people of getting long COVID or getting COVID and unfortunately ending up in hospital. At what point do we become comfortable with the risk?
I suspect we don't become comfortable with the risk until we have vaccinated twice the over 50s. So we've substantially reduced the risk to them. But I think the other thing about relaxing lockdown, Tom, is what we didn't do last time was relax individual aspects of the lockdown and find out what difference they made. So the government is saying, look, schools are the first priority. Fine. OK, let's accept that. But that probably means that the schools will go back first, and the only relaxation will be schools going back. And then there might be the next relaxation might be, well, what about all the gyms and facilities which help people to be physically active? A couple of weeks later, you could say, right, we'll let those out of lockdown, we'll end their restrictions, and then we wait a fortnight and we see how they do. Now, the trouble is all of this consumes an enormous amount of time, and it's going to be quite a long time before the last thing that happens, which is household mixing indoors, is allowed. And that, I think, is the last thing. But I don't think we should get into our heads that there is a binary issue called we're in lockdown or we're not in lockdown.
But really, this is...
in Scotland, for example, they virtually never left some form of lockdown, and actually that's probably right.
No, but for the UK government, it really is a case of third time lucky, isn't it, when it comes to the success of lifting lockdown restrictions at whatever point that is, and not seeing a rise in cases as we saw last time.
Yeah, and I don't think they should take that risk, and I don't think they will take that risk again, which is one of the reasons why I think they will be very cautious. I completely understand why schools are the priority, but I think they will let schools go back and not change other restrictions at that point. And then, of course, the other things they'll prioritise will be the things which help to keep the economy moving. You know, some of them...
Oh, yes. The economy.
Stuff happen now. Yeah, I know, absolutely. It's not an unimportant factor, is it? But the point is, the last thing that is necessary is households mixing indoors. Social gatherings, I'm afraid, are going to have to be at the back of the queue.
Really good to talk to you, if not a little depressing. Lord Andrew Lansley, thank you very much.
No,
it's fine. It's the situation we find ourselves in. Lord Andrew Lansley, former Health Secretary, former Leader of the House of Commons, Conservative life peer. Oh, man. Andy's in Portsmouth this morning. Tom, shame on those who agree with schools not opening in February. When did we become a country that stopped putting our children first? The majority of parents want their children back in school, says Andy. Well, here. Could not agree with you more. I see that on the front page of one of the papers this morning, they're suggesting that some of the private schools are gathering together to say we can vaccinate teachers quickly as possible. To be honest with you, the issue doesn't seem to me to be with vaccinating teachers, although, of course, you would wish for that to happen as soon as possible. It's about testing whether kids have the virus, whether they're spreading the virus, that mass rapid testing that was promised for schools, which in the week got kiboshed because the regulator said we're not approving this. So that's nowhere near happening at all. And you read this morning about schools potentially not going back until some point after Easter. I just wonder again about that point in February when 88% of the risk of dying, or the 88% of the people who go into hospital and sadly die from coronavirus, they will have been vaccinated. At that point, surely we start to see some restrictions coming off. No, otherwise, what is the argument to continue to lock down to protect the NHS when the NHS will have been given greater protection than it has ever had during this crisis as a result of the excellent vaccination programme? 0345 6060 973. We'll get some answers from a member of SAGE in a few moments' time, who will be live on the programme. Tom Swarbrick here. It's 10:16.
The fight against coronavirus. The race between the virus and the vaccine. Follow live on LBC.
Have you
Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
10:19 is the time. Very good morning to you. Tom Swarbrick with you this morning here on LBC. That very embodiment of confidence, coherence and control. Gavin Williamson is going to give more details on any potential reopening of schools next week. He's going to rule out, we're told in one of the papers, children returning to the classroom after the February half-term holiday. He's not going to put an exact date on reopening of schools, I think sort of understandably. But education leaders said they did not expect them to fully reopen until mid-April or even as late as May. Down goes the papers. Matthew's in Heathrow. Matthew.
Morning, Tom. What the government should do is they should already pre-plan a total shutdown just for 2 weeks, the week before Easter, week after Easter. It will damage the economy less. But literally everything, everyone could bunker down, not go out, only we have emergency people working. But if they've done the planning right in the beginning, people what need help for anything, there is actually people, they open all the hotels, and the hotels are used to basically take people to, if they break the quarantine, this curfew for 14 days, or if people become unwell.
What is this if not close to a total lockdown? I mean, shutting all schools to all people seems, unreasonable and unfair.
But it's not. We could actually eliminate it. We could do like Australia, New Zealand. I mean, if they get this in place properly to control the borders, anyone arriving, no exceptions. I mean, they should start this from next week to get the infrastructure.
Well, that is interesting, Matthew. That is interesting because they are talking about closing the border to potentially any traveller coming into the country and making them quarantine in a hotel for 10 days in order to catch the new variants at the border. Matthew, thank you. The point you make about no COVID is a really interesting one. I want to touch on with Professor Kamlesh Khunti, who is the Professor of Vascular Medicine at the University of Leicester and is also a member of the SAGE Advisory Group. Thank you for being there for us this morning, Professor. Is it your view that the government is now pursuing a no-COVID strategy with this lockdown? Good morning.
Good morning. I'm not sure what the government is aiming for. We haven't seen any of the recommendations that have been made by a number of groups, including SAGE. They're not implemented fully. So it's difficult to tell what the strategy. Obviously, the vaccination strategy is very, very strong.
Professor, we're going to try again, I think, with your line, because it's a little bit tricky to hear you, and I want to make sure that we hear you absolutely precisely, given your importance in this. We'll try and get Professor Khunti back on the line, make sure we can get a better stab at it. Meanwhile, Catherine is in Neath in South Wales. Hi there, Catherine.
Hello there. Good morning.
Hello. Hello.
You're making me a bit alarmed this morning, Tom. We spoke last year on the March the 16th when the Imperial College data modelling came out. And I said at that point that I thought we were probably going to be in this for about 2 years.
Yes.
I was preparing then for the long haul. Now I think it's more likely 4 years before anything like a new normal life can be looked at. And I think there's two things that we've got to look at now: expectations and perspective. I was listening to you the other night when you were talking about booking your holiday to Greece, and you actually really helped me to expand my level of empathy for the people who expect to be able to have foreign holidays. I don't care. I don't need a foreign holiday. I'm so lucky where I am. I don't need to go away. I'm all right. But there are so many people like you, younger people than me, who, really, really want that holiday. But you're going to have to manage your expectations, because the crushing disappointment, if you're constantly angling for your lovely young children to be taken back off your hands and taken back to school and all the rest of it, it's just not going to be possible. And the more that you're pinning your hopes on being able to return to the sort of life that we had before, the more crushing that disappointment is going to be. We've got to recognise that this is it. This is radical change, and it's very uncomfortable for everybody.
What makes you so convinced, Catherine?
It's also an opportunity.
Well, potentially, but it doesn't feel like that, to be honest. What makes you so certain that this is it for the next 4 years, even when the vaccine is rolling around, even when there are greater controls at the border to stop any new variants coming in? What makes you so certain that this is it?
Okay, well, this is actually, I'm glad you mentioned that point about the vaccinations, because I've been getting really concerned this morning listening to what you've been saying about vaccinations, and especially listening to people like that lovely teacher who is working so hard through this on the front line, but suggesting that she wants her vaccination so that she can go and visit her mum and aunt. That is not what vaccination does. It does not reduce the risk of transmitting this disease. and it won't reduce the risk of transmitting.
They're looking into that.
All
they are looking into that.
a bit more protection for your own personal self.
Yeah. Well, they are, but that's the key question that they've not quite. But that's the key question that they've not quite satisfied is what degree of transmission happens even after you're vaccinated. But you're right; it's an open question, and it would be. It makes life much tougher to get back to normal if, as you say, Catherine, there is transmissibility even once the vaccine has been taken, which is why everybody needs to get the vaccine so that we can be sure to come out of it. Hey, listen, Catherine, thank you for your call. I appreciate your perspective on, even if, again, it makes it a little depressing. Let's see if we can get back to the Professor Kamlesh Khunti, Professor of Vascular Medicine at the University of Leicester, member of SAGE. Professor, I was just exploring with you whether you thought the government's approach was now a no-COVID strategy. Oh, that doesn't seem to be working either. Wonderful. Don't seem to have the professor on that line either. Let's try Sue in Woodbridge. Sue, you don't have to happen to be a member of SAGE, do you, by any chance?
No, I wish I had a bit more information, or maybe I don't. I'm not sure. I just phoned in, Tom, to say I've actually been shielding since last March. I got an NHS letter because I have severe asthma. I'm only 59, and because I live in Suffolk, I'm not sure if you're aware, but Suffolk are badly behind in their vaccination programme. Last week, the figures were just over a third of over 80s have been vaccinated.
Really?
So I'm 59, so I don't know, I haven't heard when I'll get my vaccine. I doubt very much if this target date of the 15th of Feb is going to actually be met.
Well, at the moment, the figures nationally suggest that we'll get to that point. But you're right, the sort of disparities between different regions of the UK and even different regions of England is a worry.
Exactly, but the point about sticking to the rules is, I mean, I have been sticking to the rules, not just for my sake, but for the sake of the NHS. But I've just discovered this week that anybody who is shielding cannot go out until well after. They still have to shield after they've had the second dose of the vaccine. Now, if there's 12 months between each vaccine, I'm not going to be out until well after the summer because
I don't understand that, Sue. I'd need to check that. I don't understand why the advice would be to shield after you've had both doses of the vaccination.
It does actually say on the government website, Tom, it actually says that until you've had both vaccines, you still have to continue to shield.
Yes, until you've had both. That's absolutely right. That's what Professor Jonathan Van Tam is saying in the papers today, actually, that once you've had one dose, you need to be following the restrictions very carefully. And even after a second dose, there will be a period of time, a few weeks lag before you're able to then go out properly. So there is that, Sue. But the idea of having both and having to stick in shielding for God knows how long, I don't think is the advice at the moment. How are you finding it?
This last week has been the worst week. It really has. This last week, it's really started to get to me. I do take myself, because the thing is with asthma, you do need some fresh air. Yeah. But obviously you go out in a mask and then you're not really getting the fresh air. So the thing is, it has really got to me this past week. I tend to go out in the morning before it's light because there's a lot of people about, joggers, dog walkers and things. So I am trying to get a bit of exercise, but I think the point is now that I'm not sure, even though I really stick to the rules, I'm really not sure, for the sake of my mental health, just how long I'm going to be able to sort of, really stick indoors and stick to the rules absolutely rigidly. That probably sounds a little bit selfish, but I'm just trying to be honest with you.
Sue, it doesn't sound selfish at all. I'll be honest with you. I think many, many millions of people are in a similar position to you. And you're right. This lockdown does feel a heck of a lot harder, and time seems to be going a hell of a lot slower than it has been for the last two. And the role that the lack of good weather plays in this, I don't think can be underestimated. Good luck to you. Stay safe, Sue. Thank you very much indeed. 0345 6060 973 is the number. 84850 to text. You can tweet at LBC. I've tried to lay out the good news. The good news is we've got a vaccine, but what impact does vaccinating so many people so quickly actually have if lockdown restrictions aren't going to be eased until late April, beginning of May to start getting schools back? Is Catherine right to suggest that this is it now for the next few years, particularly with the concerns of new variants that could bust a vaccine? That means the idea of international travel as we once knew it seems a long way off. I mean, you read some of the proposals that Cabinet is looking at the moment, if you believe what you read in the papers, that quarantining for anybody, potentially anybody returning into the UK, coming into the UK for 10 days in a hotel means the idea of a summer holiday goes up the spout, doesn't it? Because what's the point? You go off for 5 nights, you come back and you spend 10 nights in a hotel at your own cost. Seems like a waste of time. 0345 6060 973. We will attempt once more to bring you the views of Professor Khunti, the member of SAGE. We were hoping to speak to the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, but despite being offered a place on the programme, the Health Secretary has decided not to take part this morning, which is a great shame because it's not like there isn't a lot to discuss. 10:30 is the time. Let's get some news headlines on LBC. Thomas Watts.
The former Health Secretary, Lord Lansley, has told LBC he expects England's coronavirus lockdown to be in place until May. Ministers have warned the government is a long way from being able to lift any of the restrictions. The millions of people who've been given a COVID-19 jab are being urged to continue observing social distancing. Health officials say it's still not known if those who've been vaccinated can pass on the virus to others. Chinese state media say 11 workers trapped in a gold mine for 2 weeks have been lifted to the surface. They became stuck some 600 metres underground after an explosion in Shandong province earlier this month. Bright and chilly for most areas today, with sleet and snow spreading across the country from Northern Ireland, Wales and southwest England, a high of 5 Celsius.
This is LBC. This is LBC Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
Morning to you. Here's Helen, who I think is bang on. Tom, until we eradicate the virus in the UK, we will have years of this nightmare. We wasted the first lockdown, but now with the vaccine, let's bite the bullet and do it properly. It will be cheaper and better in the near long run, says Helen. I can't help but think that the government's approach now, the third different approach the government may well have had to this, is to go for zero COVID. Matt Hancock saying that we are a long way from infections coming down to the levels that we need it to be to reopen. It strikes me that they're going to drive this down as near to zero as damn it, however long that takes, and then open up from that point. Which is a long way from the herd immunity policy that was being talked about in March last year. We'll talk to Sage in just a moment. Let's turn to the front pages of your papers this morning. lbc.co.uk. lbc.co.uk is where you need to go. Vaccinated people could still spread COVID-19, Jonathan Van Tam warns. Deputy Chief Medical Officer urging people in England to continue to follow the restrictions, as it's not yet clear what effect the vaccine might have on transmission, as our earlier caller was suggesting. The Observer this morning. Minister faces fury over mass outbreak of COVID at the DVLA. 500 cases that the agency has staff told to work on. The Mail on Sunday. Heads send Boris bold plan to vaccinate 1 million staff at half term. Top schools, we can jab all the teachers, which is a terrific offer. I mean, that's a wonderful thing to be able to do. Let's get everybody the vaccine as quickly as possible. I'm not sure it's the key point about getting school backs, is it? The key point about getting school backs is transmission amongst children. For that, you need testing. The Sunday Telegraph, don't break rules once you've had the vaccine. That's Jonathan Van Tam again. Sunday Times, which we'll look at in more detail. Big poll around the UK about attitudes towards the sustainability of the United Kingdom. Majority back border polls in Scotland and Northern Ireland. SNP set for a May landslide. Fewer people now regard themselves as British. We'll speak to Arlene Foster, the First Minister in Northern Ireland, a bit later in the programme. Sunday Mirror, shocking corona fatalities. Grieving families call for an inquiry into the PM's handling of COVID. The death toll set this week to reach 100,000. And the Sunday Express, Van Tam, let's stay patient. The British people should stay patient with the lockdown restrictions. Easier to say than to do. Let's try again. Third time lucky with our Professor Kamlesh Khunti, Professor of Diabetes and Vascular Medicine at the University of Leicester, a member of SAGE. Thank you for your patience, Professor, while we sort out the tech. We were talking about the no COVID approach that the government now seems to be taking. What, in your view, is their strategy? Good morning.
Good morning. I'm not quite clear if this strategy has been communicated to us. The only thing we know is the vaccination strategy. We know what proportion of people will be vaccinated. But in terms of when the lockdown will open the schools, the TTI, the test, trace, isolation, we don't know. The kind of things that we need is, at what point will we open up? So is it at a level of 10,000 cases a day? What our number will we start thinking about when we start opening up? Those are the kind of communication that we should have so that everyone has a clear indication of what to expect.
Last time around, opening up was dependent on a variety of different things, as you say, the R number, case rates, hospital provision, ICU beds. Do you know if the same metric is being used to monitor when restrictions might come off this time?
We haven't heard any strategy that's been communicated to anyone, as far as I'm aware now.
So as a member of SAGE, nothing has been said to you about the government's thinking of how, and possibly even when, but certainly how we come out of this?
Well, there's a divide. So SAGE looks at the evidence and gives it to the government. It's not the other way around. We don't hear from the government. It's for the government to act on the recommendations of the SAGE.
Let me ask you about what Deputy Chief Medical Officer Jenny Harries, a good friend to my late night programme, has said in the last few days. She said that there is no evidence of large community transmission in schools, that there is no greater risk of COVID in schools. What's the evidence for that?
Well, certain schools certainly have had outbreaks. We've had in Leicester, for example, a number of schools that have had outbreaks, but it is sporadic. It seems to be happening in some areas, especially the inner city areas, especially those where there's lots of ethnic minority populations. So there are areas that you do get high rates of community transmission, especially in schools as well.
So it's not, would it be would it be right to say that it's not schools in and of themselves that are the means by which this gets spread? It is certain areas where perhaps there is greater mixing, perhaps there is more rule breaking, for example?
Well, it may not be rule breaking. It's just that, for example, Leicester, we've been in lockdown from the start. We haven't come out yet.
Yes.
Leicester is a very deprived area. Leicester has a lot of ethnic minority populations, very multi-generation housing, high density number of people living in houses. So the ease of spread is much, much easier. And that then transfers to the schools and back into the homes.
So what needs to be done, in your view, to try and get as many schools as possible open as quickly as possible?
I think basically we need to really stamp down. We need to bend this curve really sharply, bring the rates down, maybe to 5 to 10,000 patients per day, maybe even lower. We need to get the R number down so that the spread's not there. We need a really good test, trace, isolation program that's not functioning as well. We need to compensate people to accept the test, to make sure that they are isolating if they're positive. So all the financial support that they need. And all of this needs to be communicated continuously in the right language. So certain communities, I work with the ethnic minority communities, we're not getting this information in a culturally competent way that it should be done. It needs to be handled locally with local community champions, the local GPs, the local pharmacists. These are the people who the communities trust.
I do want to come on to that, particularly around the vaccine in just a moment. But on your point about getting cases down, bending the curve, getting the R rate down, we are seeing cases start to come down. We are seeing the R rate starting to fall across the country, much more in certain regions. Is there a number that you would be comfortable with? 0.4, I think, was the R rate when we lifted the last lockdown. Are we talking about similar numbers again?
I think there's two things one needs to look at. The R rate of 0.4 seems a reasonable number, but the number of people who have the infection in the community is also important. The more people who have it, even if the R rate is low, you're still going to get the spread. And on top of that, you need that test, trace, isolation program. If you look at some of the countries, for example, in Australia, in China, 300 cases in the community and they have a complete lockdown. We just don't have anything like that here.
And therefore, does it to you make complete sense that the government is looking at locking down the borders much more stringently?
I think that makes complete sense if we hear about what happened right at the beginning and a lot of people from the government saying that we should have really stopped the borders much, much earlier on. And I think all of the work that's happening there seems to be positive.
Of course, NERVTAG advised against it back in March 2020, January 2020 it was in the end. So if we're locking down the borders much harder because of potential new variants, how long does that stay in place for? Because there could always be the possibility of new variants that get round the vaccine coming up.
Yes, so new variants, as you know, we've had them in Japan, we've had them in Brazil, we've had them in South Africa, in the UK. New variants will appear. We probably don't know about new variants that have already appeared in other countries. These are only countries that are sequencing the virus that we know of new variants. But overall, if we get elimination strategy, if we get the numbers down, the chances of the new variant replicating are different, much lower.
So these border restrictions, they're in place really for the foreseeable, aren't they?
That's right, yes.
Blimey. And just on this point about when it comes to different communities and their response to vaccination, are we seeing black and Asian minority ethnic communities or certain groups within that refusing to take the vaccine for cultural reasons or historical reasons? And what should be done in order to stop that?
So in terms of vaccination, if we look at historically the influenza vaccination, for example, that we've had for many, many years, the uptake in white population is only 70% as well. So it's not full even in the white populations. In Asians, it's about 60%. In blacks, it's about 50%. But recent surveys have shown that in terms of COVID vaccination programs, the hesitancy is much, much higher. 70% in blacks, 40% in Asians, compared to about 15% in whites. And there's a number of reasons, as you've already mentioned. There's issues about lack of trust, there's false media, there's what the content of the vaccine is, the communication isn't coming there. And indeed, where they get the vaccine, if they have to travel 100 miles away, a lot of people don't have that travel methodology to get there. So what needs to be done? Continuous community engagement. We need multilingual languages, culturally appropriate, simple terms. We need community faith leaders to help convey these messaging. We need to have the vaccination programs done in faith centres, for example. They've already started in Birmingham. I hear the uptake is really good. But this needs to be continuously done all the time. We also need data, real-time data on the uptake rates in different areas, because if we know the real-time data on uptake, we can act on it as well, and monitoring that on a continuous basis.
Yeah, it's something the government's going to have to work very hard at, as well as the NHS. Professor, I'm glad we persevered. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Professor Kamlesh Khunti, who's Professor of Diabetes and Vascular Medicine at the University of Leicester. He is a member of SAGE. 0345 6060 973 is my number. We'll talk more about that border change, the cabinet discussion going on at the moment about who it is who is going to be asked to isolate for 10 days if they come back into the country potentially in hotels that are being guarded. We'll speak to Labour's Shadow Home Secretary Nick Thomas Simmons in just a few moments' time. Tom Swarbrick here, 10:45.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast, LBC.
Conservative MP and Environment Secretary George Eustace. There is the suggestion that we might be giving a one-off payment of £500 to poor individuals who get COVID.
There's speculation about this. We do want to improve compliance rates with self-isolation for people who've tested positive, for instance.
No, but if it does happen, this is rewarding irresponsible and illegal behaviour in some instances. Well, stay home and you isolate and you wash your hands, then you won't get COVID. But if you get COVID, here's a £500 cash payout.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast, weekday mornings from 7, LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Philip is on the Isle of Wight this morning. Hiya, Philip.
Good morning, Tom. I wonder if I could ask you to highlight, or let me highlight, particular aspects of the COVID-19 vaccination rota and its disjointed application. By its very nature, the application of the rota is going to be uneven because it's nationwide and there are different demands in different areas. But I'm in tranche 3, being under 80 and 75 to 80 and vulnerable. And a friend's mother is in tranche 1, 93, on the island, and neither of us have had any notification from the NHS about when we're going to be vaccinated. And quite extraordinarily, I was talking to some friends in London who are in tranche 5, and they turned up at a major teaching hospital in southwest London last week, and they were vaccinated.
I think you're right to highlight that. You're right to highlight that. I mean, we mentioned it briefly earlier, but you're of course right that the difficulty with this is going to be. I think Matt Hancock talked about Slough as being one of the areas that is basically done with their first group of people and now moving on to their second. Well, do they slow down in order to allow the Isle of Wight to catch up, or that seems harsh on those people who want their vaccination as quickly as possible, doesn't it?
No, I agree with that, but I think it's linked to the fact that they anticipate 100,000 deaths, and if many of those deaths are caused by the uneven application, however it's caused, it's a lesson to be learned.
Well, once
let's it's the admin that's screwing it up rather than anything else.
Oh, really? Well, let's see. We'll get into some of that a bit later, Philip. But what say you to the idea that once those people, those top groups are vaccinated, 88% of the death risk has been removed. Let's say, by the start of March, once it's had time, the vaccine to sort of wash through, would we be wrong to suggest opening up again?
I don't think so.
In a careful way,
no.
Not everything.
No, absolutely. I'm most concerned about, I live on the Isle of Wight. It's a very close community, and the mental effect on people here has been quite stark. Yeah. I think it's being isolated anyway on an island, and being even more isolated because we can't go out is even more wearing.
I agree with you. This is a really, really tough time. I mean, much tougher, I think, than any of the last two lockdowns. And it's getting to the point now where the government does need to come forward to manage expectations around when we might be able to start to see some of the restrictions come off. Philip, thank you. Good luck to you. Mike's in Bridgend in South Wales. Mike?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, with regards to lockdown, locking travel down, that kind of thing, I think that the reason why the travel industry has to be treated differently to every other industry is that that's the industry which seeded the virus across the entire globe in the first place within a couple of weeks or months, really, within a month or two. And so the idea that, for example, like Piers Morgan is on TV regularly ripping people apart for not doing the right thing, and then he's jetting off on holiday because he can't afford to do it, and no doubt quarantining. But I just think that the idea of holidays and this summer going all over the world abroad is just absolutely madness. It was madness that we didn't lock down travel at the start. It's madness we haven't locked it down up until now, and it's madness that we're only considering it at the moment. It's just stupid. If you unlock all the travel and everybody's going everywhere else, the Brazilian variant gets to the UK, or the South African variant gets here, and then we're in a hell of a lot of trouble again, potentially.
Well, Mike, listen, Yes, I mean, I've had a bee in my bonnet about this for some time, but it is worth pointing out again that the advice to government from the group NerveTag that were looking into this time last year was they didn't think that border restrictions were effective. But of course, we're in a different place now. And you're right. As someone who likes to be optimistic and think maybe there was a chance of getting abroad this summer if the opportunity was available, I just don't think it's going to happen now. Mike, thank you so much for your call. I've got to move on. Thank you very much indeed. Let's speak to Nick Thomas-Symonds, who's the Shadow Home Secretary. He is Labour MP for Torvine. Thank you very much for coming on the programme this morning, Mr. Thomas-Symonds. Let's start with those border restrictions. A member of SAGE telling this programme in the last few moments that he thinks these restrictions are going to be in place for the foreseeable. I wonder whether you agree.
Well, look, I do think that border restrictions need to be in place for the foreseeable future because of the risk of the mutations of the virus that are coming in from other countries, which are extraordinarily serious. But the government needs to put additional protections in at the border. They need, in my view, to move to a system of hotel quarantining, and they need a comprehensive plan for the borders to stop the chaotic scenes. We've seen these awful chaotic scenes at Heathrow Airport over the weekend. And in the initial quarantining system the government introduced, formal system, wasn't until June last year. The UK was a total international outlier. In May last year, It was only the UK, Iran, Luxembourg and the US Virgin Islands without travel restrictions. The government's been too slow throughout. They need to get that plan in place as soon as possible.
I mean, again, to be fair, there were some restrictions on. There were restrictions on where you could go, but you're right, coming back into the country, there was not at the same level as Australia or New Zealand. But again, on that, the scientists themselves told government repeatedly, and in fact, their view still is, members of NERVTAG, their view still is that the restrictions at the border are ineffective. Do you think the government should be going against the scientists then on this one?
Well, no. I mean, let me just take one example. If you look at the SAGE advice from the 22nd of March last year, which was just before the lockdown, the reason the SAGE advice on the border was being given as it was because the virus was out of control in the United Kingdom at the time.
Yes, but in January, sorry to go back on this, but in January 2020, it was not out of control in the United Kingdom, and yet then they were saying that it would be ineffective.
No, but the point is this. The period between January and the 22nd of March, the government did not put formal quarantining into place. In fact, they only formally quarantined 273 people from 4 flights in that period when over 20 million people came into the country. And still, there is no explanation. They gave some guidance. It is true, yes, they gave some guidance about self-isolation, but even that guidance was taken away on the 13th of March. We've never had a credible explanation as to why that was done. That's why SAGE ended up giving the advice they did on the 22nd of March. It was because of the failure of the government in the earlier part of the year to put measures into place with regard to our borders.
I do think it is worth pointing out, though, that the scientific advice to government, even before March, was that it would be, in theory, ineffective to do it. But we won't labour the point too much. Let me ask you about this global fight back that you want to see the government undertake against the new variants, new strains, through a global mutation monitor. What's this about?
Yeah, I'll come to that. But just to pick up on your point about the early part of the year, the chief scientific advisor said that was when the virus was being seeded from across Europe. So they were having advice on the dangers at the time. But to come to this point with regard to the global mutation monitor around the world, there is no structure in place at the moment in order for countries to act quickly about mutations of the virus. Now, the reason we know about the situation in South Africa, situation in Brazil, and indeed the situation here, is because of the genome sequencing that exists. We lead the world in genome sequencing. And what we're saying is we need to share that around the world. We need to have a system in place around the world where we eliminate the virus anywhere without eliminating it everywhere. That's the approach that is essential for us and indeed around the world.
Do you think then, the government has put a lot of money into COVAX, the global body that helps get vaccines to the poorest parts of the world. Do you think the government should forego on getting as many doses as of the AstraZeneca vaccine in order that more people around the world could receive it?
No, it's not an either-or discussion in that way. Firstly, we were the first country to, our scientists at the forefront of getting this vaccine. We want to be the first in the world to roll it out. But it is a mutual interest in ensuring that people are vaccinated around the world. The reason being, of course, that if we were able to vaccinate, but there are other mutations around the world, then there's obviously the danger they will come back to this country. So it's a mutual interest in all of us around the world, not some sort of competition.
We're going to hit this week, potentially this week, but unfortunately we are going to hit it. It looks like this horrific figure of 100,000 coronavirus-related deaths in the UK, unimaginable a year or so ago. What does that say, do you think, about overall the management of this?
Well, look, I think firstly, it's an extraordinary tragedy. I mean, we talk about that statistic. It's an awful statistic. And we think of all those families for whom life will never be the same again. In terms of what it says about the pandemic, I think I'm afraid, shows that we have the highest death toll in Europe and the worst economic hit of any major economy. Those two statistics are extraordinarily sad. And the government, I'm afraid, has to take responsibility for that.
Good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on the programme. Nick Thomas-Symonds, Shadow Home Secretary, Labour MP for Torvine. Thank you very much for being there for us. After the news at 11 o'clock, I want your thoughts on the border issue. As you've just heard, Nick Thomas-Symonds, Shadow Home Secretary, saying that, again, for the foreseeable, these border restrictions, which could include isolating, quarantining with guards in the hotels for 10 days once you've arrived back in the UK, that kiboshes any summer travel plans. It also, I'm afraid, if you work in the tourism aviation industry, doesn't look good for you and your job there. We'll speak about the NHS, the pressures on there too. We'll speak to Dr. Alison Pittard, Dean of the Faculty of Intensive Care Medicine, and we'll get the view of what's going well in Israel, the country that has seemed to roll out the vaccine better than most. We'll speak to their former coronavirus SAR as well to see what worked and what could be implemented in the UK. Oh, and by the way, it's snowing. It's the last thing we need.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 11 o'clock. The former Health Secretary, Lord Lansley, has told LBC that England's coronavirus lockdown could last until May. Ministers have warned they are a long way from being able to lift the restrictions, despite signs of a slowdown in transmission. They say the NHS remains under intense pressure. Speaking to Swarbrick on Sunday, Lord Lansley warned an Easter timescale is likely to be too optimistic.
It has to continue until we've reached the point at which the case numbers are sufficiently low that the pressure on the NHS has eased enormously. So, answer, is there a roadmap out of lockdown? I don't suppose there is, actually.
3/4 of people over the age of 80 in England have now had a first COVID-19 jab. Anyone who's been vaccinated is being urged to keep following social distancing guidelines by England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer. Professor Jonathan Van Tam says it's not yet clear if inoculated people can continue to spread the virus. Police have issued 78 people with lockdown fines after breaking up a rave in East London. Officers raided the unlicensed music event in Hackney early yesterday morning.
Get back in! Turn around! Back out the other way! Get up!
Scotland Yard says officers had to force their way into the building after organisers padlocked the doors from the inside. Joe Biden has spoken to Boris Johnson in his first call to a European leader as president. They are said to have discussed climate change and Mr. Biden's decision to restore ties with the World Health Organization. 11 workers have been rescued after 2 weeks trapped inside a gold mine in China. They've been hauled up one by one in baskets following an explosion near the entrance of the site in Shandong province. The condition of another 10 people stuck underground remains unclear. Forecasters say wintry conditions are likely to become more hazardous into next week. Heavy snow has been falling across much of Wales, southern and central England this morning. It's affecting some places, clearing up flood damage following Storm Christoph. Claire Dinnis from the Environment Agency is working on the recovery operation in Bewdley in Worcestershire.
The river levels here are incredibly high. We're not at that record level that we saw last year. We're not at the peak yet either. But we are in a very extreme situation again.
Those wintry showers moving into southeast England and the Midlands. Windy in the far southwest, clear and cold elsewhere, a high of 5 Celsius. From Global's newsroom, I'm Thomas Watts.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Very good morning to you. Just gone 11 o'clock. You are listening to Swarbrick on Sunday here on LBC. Hope we find you very well this Sunday morning. Very wintry, depending on where in the country you are. I think I'm being told, I can't see from here, it's a windowless area. I'm being told the snow is it settling in London right now? I think it's settling in London right now. But if you've woken up this morning, pull back the curtains, you might see that many parts of the country absolutely blanketed with the white stuff. Listen, I don't want to be down about it. It's great, lovely. You can get outside if you can, and you can sled around the place, all very fun. I worry about the vaccine rollout, to be honest with you, when they're going to start getting stuck in the snow. On that point, there are lots of calls for teachers to be vaccinated as quickly as possible. There are private schools saying that they can jab all teachers Within weeks, head teachers drawing up a detailed blueprint to get the education workforce, including support staff, inoculated over the February half-term week. But as we've been talking about over the course of the last hour or so, the chances of getting schools back open any time before Easter seem now to be vanishingly small. As well as that, there are changes coming to the border, Cabinet to back guarded hotel quarantine. British families returning from foreign holidays will have to pay to spend 10 days in an airport hotel under heavy guard in plans backed by the Home Office. That completely kiboshes your summer holiday, doesn't it? As we've just heard, member of SAGE saying that those restrictions could well be in for the foreseeable. There's also a call when it comes to the vaccine to reduce the gap between the first and the second doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Chris Whitty is being lobbied. Extending the maximum wait from 3 to 12 weeks was a public health decision to get the first jab to more people across the UK, was his rationale. But he's now being told by the British Medical Association that that is difficult to justify and should be changed to 6 weeks. Let's speak to Dr. Alison Pittard, who is Dean of the Faculty of Intensive Care Medicine and Intensive Care Consultant. Thank you for joining the programme this morning, Dr. Pittard. Why is this gap now difficult to justify, do you think?
Well, I'm not sure that it is difficult to justify. I think that we need to put our trust in the JCVI and MHRA, and they have looked at all the evidence and tried to weigh up the risks and benefits of making this decision. And of course, when you are expecting to have your second vaccination 3 weeks after the first, and then that distance is suddenly extended, it's completely normal to be worried about that and what the implications are for you as an individual. And I myself had my first vaccine expecting the second one to be 3 weeks later, and was concerned for my own health. But listening to the advice and putting our trust in people who are the experts who make these sorts of decisions, looking at the population as a whole, then I feel that they have made the right decision in order to get as many people vaccinated as possible with the first vaccine, to try and get us out of the situation that we're currently in.
Yes, and I see that one of your medical colleagues, Deputy Chief Medical Officer Jonathan Van Tam, writing in the papers today to urge people to keep following the restrictions once they've had the first jab, because it's not yet clear about transmission. Would that apply to the second jab as well? For those people who are lucky enough to have now had both, is the advice still to stay inside?
Yes, it is, because although we know that being vaccinated protects you as an individual from either getting the virus or actually becoming seriously ill with it, what we don't know is whether you could still be an asymptomatic carrier and therefore pass it on to somebody else who hasn't been vaccinated or remains vulnerable. So until we get more information on the effects of the vaccine, then it's really important not to reduce the precautions that you're listening to, and we still need to make sure that we adhere to the restrictions that are currently in place and still practice hands, face and space to protect as many people as possible.
I mean, you are absolutely at the sharp end of this, being in intensive care, and I want to come on to those pressures in just a moment. But what would you say to people who have spent a long time locked down, really getting frustrated with this now, who see that by the middle of February, the 88% of people who are, the 88% who are most likely to die and most likely to become seriously ill have now been vaccinated. And they will start to say, right, can we see these restrictions lifted, please? What would you say to them to calm them down and to manage expectations?
That's a difficult one, and I've seen firsthand the impact that extended lockdowns and restrictions have had on individual people, both personally and in my professional capacity as well. And I appreciate how hard it is. We've not been living for the last year, we've been existing. But what would be really disappointing is if we all let our guard down and that the numbers of infections in the community don't fall or in fact start to rise again, and we continue to have these restrictions for even longer than is necessary. So although it's difficult for everybody, whatever your background is and your own personal circumstances. We need to make sure that collectively we do what we're advised to do, and we will get through this.
The difficulty now, though, is we don't know what necessary means. I mean, is it your view that we continue with this level of lockdown measure until all the over 50s have received both jabs, which could be some time yet?
Again, what I can't do is say what the exact level of restriction should be, because that isn't my area of expertise. But what I do know is that the people who are making these decisions, the scientists, the government advisors, they are the experts in this. And if we stop trusting the experts, then we don't have any hope. As an intensive care consultant myself, I hope that people trust myself, my colleagues and all the other health professionals to do the right thing. And therefore, we have to put our trust in the scientists.
Talking of trust, I wonder what you made of the press conference on Friday night, which gave out information about the potential greater mortality of the new variant, underpinned by saying that they weren't quite sure, but that maybe there was a 30% greater chance of dying. Have you seen... Do you think what you're seeing in intensive care is related to that change? And how confident should we be in the science behind this?
I think it's always difficult to extrapolate what we're being told either in the media or what's coming through scientific reports and what we're seeing on the front line. I think what happened on Friday was the Prime Minister and other people were being completely honest. Things change in this pandemic so quickly, and that we have to respond differently on a daily basis. So if there is a signal that this might be more deadly than the first variant, then it's important to share that information to try and make sure that people realise how important it is to continue with the restrictions. In terms of mortality in hospitals, we don't have any evidence, certainly from the intensive care data, that mortality is worse this time round. But we are seeing younger patients coming into hospital and coming into intensive care. So something is different. But whether that's due to the change in the variant or other factors is difficult to tell at this moment in time.
Yes, I was going to ask why you think that might be. Is it the case? There's so many reasons why it might be the case, but to your mind, it is a noticeable increase in the young people coming into intensive care now.
Definitely. I mean, what we can see from published data, and we have our national audit programme that publishes data on a weekly basis, is that the actual average age doesn't appear to have changed nationally. But what we are seeing are younger patients. It's difficult to say why that is the case. It may be that this time round with the lockdown, that there is a lot more activity going on. There is more of the essential activities, people going to work. And of course, people going to work are younger people. So they're going to be more at risk of catching the virus in the first place. But I'm sure there are other factors involved that has an influence on the types of people who are catching the infection and coming into hospital.
And I wonder, therefore, what impact that might have on decisions around how to manage the risk. If we're saying that more younger people, those in their 40s, are ending up in intensive care, would it be your view? Do you think there is support for the idea of saying, well, we're going to lock down until the over 40s have been vaccinated, given the risk to them?
Again, I think that's difficult because one has to look at that decision in a much bigger picture. And I can only see it from a healthcare point of view and as a person delivering care on the front line. And I don't see all the other things that decision could impact on it in terms of business and other things as well. And the mental health and well-being of everybody in the community. So it's a difficult decision. And I think those decisions are best left to the experts.
Just coming back to your role and being on the front line, as it were. I mean, people use that description. It's a word out of war, isn't it, to talk about the front line? And indeed, I see in the papers there is a doctor, an army medic who's been working in a hospital who has described it as like a war zone in Afghanistan. I wonder whether you agree with that assessment, that it is akin to war zones.
Well, fortunately, I've never been on the front line in a war zone. Obviously, I've seen it depicted in various ways. What I can say is going to work at the moment and working with patients who are severely ill, out in the hospital wards as well as in intensive care, it's very different to our normal practice. We have so many people who are so sick. You're doing long shifts in PPE. It's hard. People are dying. And staff are exhausted. They're on their knees. They don't want to be doing this anymore. But of course, that's what we're trained to do. That's the job that we love doing, and we want to help people. But it is exhausting, and people go home drained. Staff are crying on shift, after shift, crying before they come to work. It's just not very nice. And all that we want is to get back to a semblance of normality, and whatever we can do to achieve that has to be for the greater good.
Yeah, and I think it's going to involve locking down for some months to come. Great to talk to you, Dr. Pittard. Thank you very much indeed. Alison Pittard, Dean of the Faculty of Intensive Care Medicine and an intensive care consultant. Yeah, the descriptions of what it's like in hospitals at the moment. Well, if you work in a hospital, you will know better than I do, but it just sounds absolutely horrific. Even with the additional support from the army, you've got an army medic in the papers saying it's like being in Afghanistan, then you can get a sense of just how bad it really is in there. And to that end, I wonder whether that means that the lockdown has to continue past February, past March, into April. Schools don't go back till some point in May. 0345 6060 973. And the idea of going on a summer holiday? Forget it. Tom Swarbrick here, 11:15.
This is LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
We'll come back to the politics of this in just a moment. We'll speak to Tim Lawton, Conservative MP for East Worthing. Alex is in Leigh-on-Sea, though, first. Hi, Alex.
Yeah, hello, Tom. How are you doing?
Hello. Yeah, you know, like everybody else. One foot in front of the other, I think.
Expected, so to speak.
That's right, that's right. Fire away, Alex.
Just a couple of points I wanted to raise. The first one really is the comparisons that keep taking place between Australia and New Zealand and how well they're doing. I just wanted to remind everybody that Australia is a country with a land area in excess of 7.5 million square kilometres. The concentration of its population is mostly on the east coast. Most of the country's empty. It's empty desert. There's lots of things with either no legs or four legs that might get you before COVID does. It's a country, and New Zealand is not dissimilar in some respects, but these nations bear no comparison with the UK insofar as the population's much more thinly spread. In Australia, it's concentrated mainly on the southeast coast, and these nations are substantially more easy to manage from a quarantining and lockdown perspective than the UK would ever be. So I just wish people would temper this debate and the doom and gloom with some realism.
Well, we've got. I think, Alex, though, but your description, and you're absolutely right. Your description of the differences strike me as an argument for locking down Britain much harder. I mean, Heathrow is the world's global air hub, or at least was until all of this. So you're right, there is no surprise that the UK is going to be hard hit by this, really. It's easy to say now, of course. But aren't you making an argument that leads you to the conclusion that you ought really to lock down a lot harder given Britain's geography?
To a degree, but having said that, it depends how far you want to take this. I mean, I don't want to see martial law and troops on the streets. This isn't North Korea. I understand that the virus is dangerous and it has to be controlled. I'm not saying that that's not the case for a moment. And I accept your point that I'm, in effect, making a case for the reverse. Yes. But incidentally, I used to work at Heathrow for a certain airline until last year, and obviously I've got first-hand experience of just how decimated and how destroyed the aviation and travel businesses have been. I'm not working at the moment, and I'll probably never work in aviation again, which is a shame.
I'm sorry.
But that's one of those things. That's the way it goes.
Yes, and listen, I don't think those border restrictions are going to change. Once they come in, of course, these ones that talk about quarantining people in hotels for 10 days, I just don't see that changing because there's always the possibility of a new variant somewhere in the world popping up and getting around the vaccine. Alex, thank you to you. 03456 6060 973 is the number. I mentioned it a bit earlier in the programme. The quiet extension of lockdown laws that have been given to councils. They've had the power to close pubs, restaurants, shops and public spaces extended until July the 17th. Let's turn to Tim Lawton, who is Conservative MP for East Worthing and Shoreham, former Children's Minister, who is part of the COVID recovery group. Thank you for being on the line for us this morning, Mr. Lawton. Good to speak to you.
Morning,
your
Tom.
thoughts about the extension of this legal power?
Well, I hope it's only an extension in theory, and this is a part of very complex legislation, which some of us have had serious concerns about. But we've got to have a clear exit plan for how we get back to some degree of normality, and simply pushing things back and back and back has got serious implications for our businesses, for our kids going to school, for the way we're running our lives. And that's why we want to see much more clarity and ambition about how we can lock things up rather than how we can unlock things, rather than continuing pushing back the date for when we can do that.
We spoke to a member of SAGE this morning who said that they were not aware of what the government's strategy is on this. Clearly, it hasn't been shared. If there is one, it hasn't been shared down the chain. Matt Hancock talking this morning about a very, very, very long way to go before cases are down sufficiently enough to think about opening. Do you worry about people's expectations of getting their lives back to normal here? Because mid-February is not far off.
There is severe lockdown fatigue. I mean, this has now been going on for almost a year, when a lot of people have had their lives on hold, and we absolutely understand why, and we're in no way trying to undermine the seriousness of the challenge that we face. The question is the way that you deal with that challenge and the balance of risk. So no option is risk-free. We know that, and if medical purists were to have their way, then everything would be locked down. Everybody would have to stay in their homes. Nothing would be operating. That obviously is completely and utterly unrealistic. So we have to have a balance of risk about being able to get on with our lives as much as possible with taking necessary precautions. And it's that balance, I think, there needs to be much greater explanation and clarity around. And we still don't know exactly where we are most at risk of passing on this infection. It seems to be mostly people getting together economy, have locked down pubs and many shops and things like that. But all those outfits took very serious precautions, invested in all sorts of social distancing and other precautions that appear to be working quite well. So how much would it impact on the infection if we were to open up some of those parts of the economy in the near future with all those restrictions still in place? Those are sort of questions I think people want to have the answers to.
I wonder, in your discussions with ministers in the tea rooms in the House of Commons, if you get near enough to want to be able to talk to them, whether you get the sense that the government's intention is to say, well, come mid-February, when the vaccine has been delivered to those groups of people most at risk, that's the moment to then start talking in the language of, well, what can we open up? What can we bring back?
Well, I think that would be great, and I think many people and ministers would like to see that happen, but we're far from getting that commitment. So that's why many of us who've had severe reservations about the blunt tool of a full lockdown in the past have said, look, if we are able to target that date of mid-February, when we will have vaccinated those key 4 groups, accounting for something like 88% of the fatalities, then soon after that, and there's the whole thing about it takes 2 weeks for the vaccine to kick in for full protection, we ought to be able to start proportionately to be unlocking certain parts of the economy. Won't be risk-free, as I've said, but the balance of risk, surely, if you've taken out so many of the most vulnerable people, must be that you can start to open things up as well. There's got to be a tipping point when we've achieved a degree of protection so that you can start opening things up with a much lower risk level. And that's why we say we want a sort of route map out of this, including, as a high priority, getting our kids back to school, which is what I'm most worried about of all.
Yes. And judging that moment, that tipping point, as you describe it, is has consequences for the health system, has consequences for individuals, for the economy. There's even, I guess, there's a moral question in there too about what balance of risk are we willing to live with. For you, what's the political consequence, do you think, of the government saying, well, actually, we judge that the risk is still too great by the start of March, so we're not going to bring any restrictions off?
I think it's difficult to say. The opinion polls seem to suggest at the moment that most people are still fairly hawkish on lockdowns. But I think at the same time, if people see the consequences of so many people having them been vaccinated, they're going to want to see a payoff as well. And if when we get to the middle of February and we've vaccinated those 15 million or so people, but we're still carrying on as normal, I think people are going to then ask, well, hold on, how much longer is it going to take? Is my child going to be able to go back to school before Easter or before summer or whatever? And people have got to plan for their lives. You know, businesses have been on hold. There are lots of businesses that are just clinging on. And without the certainty of knowing when they're going to be able to get back, put their shutters back up again, then some of those businesses won't be able to cling on much longer. We need to have greater clarity, which is why, all things being equal and with all the invariables there still are, to have some sort of route map. And I called, when we had the debate on this recently, to say that can we have as the default position that schools will plan to go back after February half term. If that can't happen because figures are still way too high, whatever, then people understand it. But if things are going in the right direction, then let's make sure schools have prepared so that they can do that if it's remotely possible.
And you have confidence in Gavin Williamson being the right man to manage that?
Well, it's not about personalities and individuals. It's about making sure that all our schools and our head teachers and our teachers who've had such a challenging role have some certainty that they can make the necessary plans and make sure they got the necessary precautions in place, and also make sure that we have our teachers vaccinated. And some of us would like to see teachers bumped up in the priority list, and there are plans in the papers today to say how, if we have the vaccine available, which is a big determinant, of course, then teachers could be vaccinated over the February half term to make it much easier for them to be able to go back more safely to schools.
Let's see if we get to that point. Tim, really good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Tim Lawton, Conservative MP for East Worthing and Shoreham, a former children's minister who, as you heard, is part of the COVID recovery group, the backbench group of Conservative MPs who are pushing the government into outlining what the plan is to get us out of lockdown and what the assessment is about when that might start to happen. and it's not, to me, it's not really a question of when, because setting time, well, it is a question of when, but setting certainties in time is very, very difficult at the moment. I think we all understand that. But I think how is something that the government needs to outline pretty quickly, because as Tim was saying, and as you will know, lockdown fatigue is really kicking in for people now. I in the small number of people I get to speak to, I hear it from people, I see it myself. I mean, you don't have to look very far to find it. People are really up against it right now. And it's certainly, this period of time is passing a heck of a lot slower than any of the other lockdowns. 0345 6060 973 is my number. 84850 to text. You can tweet at LBC. What about those who cannot pay the hotel bill to quarantine on arrival into the UK? Will it be means tested, says this texter. Don't know is the answer, but you're right to ask the question. I guess if you can't afford to pay the hotel bill for your own quarantine once you're back in, you probably shouldn't be going on the holiday, I guess is the point. Come to more of your calls in a few moments. Plus, we'll speak to Israel's former coronavirus czar about the country's response to vaccinating and to COVID in general, and about what lessons the UK can learn and what maybe we could do in order to get our vaccination programme running at an even faster rate. Tom Swarbrick here. It's 11:30. News headlines now. Thomas Watts.
The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, has warned England is a long, long, long way from an end to lockdown measures. One of Mr Hancock's predecessors, Lord Lansley, has told LBC the coronavirus restrictions could last until May. Fines totalling more than £15,000 have been issued at an illegal rave in East London. More than 300 people attended the event in Hackney early yesterday morning. Heavy snow is causing disruption to essential journeys across much of the country. The wintry conditions have forced the closure of 4 COVID vaccination centres in South Wales. That's sleet and snow moving into the Midlands and South East England. Some bright spells elsewhere, but staying cold. It'll become frosty later, a high of 5 Celsius.
This is LBC. LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick. Live from Westminster. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
You keep saying, morning by the way, you keep saying close the borders, says this texter. What about employment in airlines, at airports, hotels, ferry companies, tourist attractions, restaurants that serve the tourists? Eurostar? Well, Eurostar is in real financial trouble, as you know, because they're seeking a bailout at the moment. Airports and airlines are massively impacted by this. Hotels may well be about to get a reprieve if it is indeed the case that the government starts to demand that people coming back from holiday or coming into the United Kingdom have to go into a hotel for 10 days. That will involve some payments towards those hotel chains, so that may help a bit. And it does, to me, but what do I know, seem like this is going to be in place for quite some time to come, these kinds of restrictions at the border, thus making international travel very, very difficult, if not impossible financially for a lot of people, if you've got to shell out for the hotel at the end of it for 10 days. David's in Manchester. Hi there, David.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
Yes, good, sir. Your thoughts today?
Yeah, but there's not much I would agree with Tim Lawton on politically generally, but I think he's got it pretty spot on. I think there is a general lockdown fatigue that is, we're now seeing starting to translate into younger people breaking COVID rules. And I think part of that is just the fact that there's no hope for people. People have to be given something to work to. And I think that's a major problem.
I completely agree. The figures on lockdown breaking don't seem to have moved that much, to be honest. It's true to say that this lockdown isn't as tight as the one in March, but maybe that's because we know a bit more about it and how to prevent the spread of it. But I think you're right, and I think this idea of the middle of February as being a great moment where we've reached the point where all those people have been vaccinated, that's terrific. But only if I think the majority of people who haven't been vaccinated see some material change to their lives.
Absolutely. I think the target of mid-February for lockdown easing restrictions is for the birds, to be honest. And this is part of my point. The government needs to be honest with people about what this lockdown and what this roadmap looks like. People are reasonable enough to expect that, they're not going to be going on holiday this year. I think the general public understand that. But what we want is a level of normality to come back. And it's that lack of hope and that lack of the ability to plan for the future. But I think particularly a lot of younger people now, your previous caller mentioned the more younger people going into A&E and then being admitted to ICU. Now, I think that is partly down to the fact that they have sacrificed so much. Now that may be a bit blasé, but it is that point. They need to have something to work to.
How old are you, David, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 33, and I'm in a fortunate position. We've got two incomes. I have a job. I have a nice home. I have a garden. But I also think I heard a caller earlier on. I think the lady's name was Catherine. Talking about, look at this is going to be 4 years. Again, that is just madness. That may be the case, but that is completely unsustainable.
Well, it depends in what form this goes on for years and years and years. It's certainly going to be with us for years and years and years.
Yes.
But if we're able to have robust testing in place, if we're able to trace it, if we're able to keep it low enough, as they're doing in Australia and New Zealand, to have some normality restored, then that's fine. This going from one lockdown to another lockdown that's the unsustainable bit, I think. But David, I totally agree with your point about younger people. And actually, it would be interesting to hear from you if you are, I don't know, what age should we put at, 18 to 35, falling into that group that David and I fall into. I wonder if you are going to see that moment in mid-February once people have been vaccinated and once the vaccine has got through, so maybe, the start of March. If things haven't changed, haven't opened up, are you going to... You're going to continue to abide by the lockdown, are you? Or are you going to be so frustrated and irritated by all this, feel that your life has been put on hold for so long that you'll go about your own business? I don't know. 0345 6060 973. Mike's in Honiton in Devon. Hi there, Mike.
Hello. Tom,
Hello.
I lost my sight a little over 20 years ago. I have had problems, obviously, getting about. I had everything going for me before I had that. I had a wife, but unfortunately I lost her through cancer. I used to play off a handicap of 4 at golf. I was an avid reader. Now I can't play golf. I haven't got my wife. And now succumbed to this virus. It really is a question of putting up with it and taking the best thing that you can get at the time. I've got lots of friends. I can't see them at the moment, obviously. I can't even see my children at the moment. I've got new grandchildren, great-grandchildren, who were born on the 16th of February last year. I haven't seen them yet. And
Mike,
people are saying, "Oh, yeah, we can't do it. We're suffering." Adapt. There's 3 things that I've used in my life: adapt, improvise, overcome. If people can work like that, then we have a lot better attitude regarding this going on at the moment.
Well, Mike, give us a lesson in resilience then, as you see it, from someone who is, I think it's fair to say, hope I'm not downplaying it by saying you've been through the mill quite a bit here.
Say again, sorry, I missed that bit.
That you've been through the mill a lot, sir, Mike, when it comes to the problems over the last few years.
Adapt, improvise, overcome. Those are the things that I've adapted in my life. I was 30 years in the army, and I had a wonderful career, wonderful wife, wonderful family. Everything was going for me. Then this bug comes along after all these years. I lost my wife, as I told you, 8 years ago through cancer. Well, you face up to these situations. You really do. You have to face up to the situations. My children look after me regarding food. I have no problem with that. I do go out occasionally, but I only go as far as 100 yards up the road where the shops are. Then I come back again.
Would you, Mike, say that people who are chomping at the bit to get out there and who, might throw their hands up in the air at the beginning of March and say, "Oh, to hell with this, I'm carrying on," would you say that they're selfish? Yeah, indeed.
They're the people that are spreading this disease about all over the place. Being an ex-soldier, if you told me to sit down and keep quiet, I sit down and keep quiet. We don't like. The Germans have been good at this. They like discipline. We don't like discipline. We don't like being told what to do. By our very nature, we are British, and I'm very proud that we are. But there are times when you have to cow down to this situation, do what the people say. I'm worried about what the politicians are going to say because they're scared of their own shadow. You never get a yes/no answer out of them. They don't know who's going to open the door next. And they can't speak.
Well, I tell you what, Mike, it would be lovely to get to put some question to them to get some answers out of them this morning. Unfortunately, the Health Secretary declined to come on. Mike, thank you so much for your call. I think a good lesson in resilience for people. It's just tough, isn't it? It's just really, really tough. This. Naomi's in Edgware. Hi, Naomi.
Hi. Good morning, Tom. Good morning to you.
Hi.
Hi. I have a question. The latest research shows that the gap of 12 weeks between the first and the second Pfizer vaccine is not ideal. Now, I'm fortunate enough to be booked in this week to have a vaccination. I understand it's the AstraZeneca one. There's no information on that one at all. How are we able to find out where we stand with this? How are we able to find out if they're actually going to reduce the waiting time, but also for the AstraZeneca one? I think that the current research coming out from Israel is saying that it's pretty useless. About 30% active, the Pfizer one, but we have no information on the AstraZeneca one at all. How do we find out?
Yeah, Naomi, it's a really, really good question. As I put it to Dr. Pittard a little bit earlier this hour about whether the gap can be reduced between doses, her view was that it's fine, it's explicable.
Yes, I heard that, but that's not what the research is saying that's coming out from Israel at the moment.
Yeah, I've seen that, and we will be speaking to the former Israeli COVID czar a bit later on in the programme to ask specifically about that research. So stay tuned, Naomi, because we'll try and get some answers on that. But where are you being vaccinated?
In my GP practice. Our 2 practices have joined up, and a lot of my friends, I'm 71, so we're very fortunate. They're actually sort of getting through them pretty quickly.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's great.
Yeah, we've been very fortunate, and I'm very grateful for that. But however, getting through it quickly, but then having to wait 12 weeks for the second one leaves me, sort of not feeling very secure about the whole thing.
No, I understand, Naomi. I do. I'll put some of those questions to our guest when he comes on a bit later in the programme. It's a good question, Naomi. Thank you so much. Hope the vaccination goes well. Hugh's in Battersea. Hi, Hugh.
Hi there, Tom.
Hello.
I just wanted to pass on some advice to your listeners that I got given. I see a lady twice a year to talk to. Call her my listening lady. And she said, very often we all face the same problems, except you can either live in the penthouse or you can live in the basement. The man who lives in the basement looks out the window, he sees snow, he sees cold, it's wet, it's horrible, and straight away that's his attitude for the day. The man in the penthouse looks out, he sees snow, he sees tobogganing, he sees fun with his children. He just looks at the same problem from a different angle. But the positivity makes life a little bit more enjoyable and bearable than looking at things from a negative perspective.
We all need to live in a penthouse then, Hugh.
Well, I looked at this lockdown as an opportunity to not do what I did the first lockdown, which was eat and drink like a lunatic. And instead work out, listen to what my wife says, count my calories, exercise every day, and £9 down so far. So I can look at it as positive or negative.
It's funny you say that, Hugh, because I've resolved to do a similar thing. I drank and ate my way through the last one, like you may have done, and so I've resolved to run a bit more and get out a bit. To the point where I found myself, I do a show during the week that finishes at 1 a.m. and I get home at about 2. Stupidly, I found myself running around the streets of the town where I live at 4 o'clock in the morning. Yeah,
I heard you saying that. I heard you saying that, and I thought, but that's a really positive thing. So you think, well, I've got that to look forward to.
It's good advice. It is good advice. It's helpful advice because a lot of people are struggling at the moment, and with no sign of a reprieve on the horizon, and with those in officialdom saying that we're a very, very long way off getting our lives back to any degree, it is helpful to try and get up to the penthouse every once in a while to view things from up there. Hugh, good call. Thank you very much indeed. 0345 6060 973 is my number. We'll talk more about it in more detail after 12, but Sunday Times this morning have done some really deep polling into the potential breakup of the United Kingdom, and they say that a majority now back border polls in both Scotland and Northern Ireland. We'll talk about that with Arlene Foster, the First Minister of Northern Ireland, in just a few moments. Tom Swarbrick here, 11:47.
Eddie Mair on LBC.
Is this correct then that it's fines for people who are attending a party of 15 or more, but there's no fine for 14?
But my understanding of what she'd said was that it had to be 15 or more, and then those fines...
Well, does that make sense to you?
There always has to be a number, obviously, you would choose.
But since you support this policy, is it then legal, you will not be fined if you are in a house party with 14 people?
There are other rules as well already in place about household mixing.
But you will be fined for it.
You know, this particular fine, no, it will not. That's how I understood it.
Yeah. I'm just asking you, I hope you understand. I realise this isn't your policy, but it's a policy you agree with. Does it make sense to you if you can have a big party with 14 people and you won't have to pay the £800 fine?
Eddie Mair, Monday to Friday from 4 p.m. on LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
11:51 is the time. We'll get your thoughts on this after the news at 12, this polling about the disunited kingdom. But let's turn to Arlene Foster on it, First Minister of Northern Ireland, leader of the DUP. Thank you very much for joining the programme this morning, Arlene. Just before I come on to the polling and what you make of it, let me just ask you briefly about COVID restrictions in Northern Ireland and your extension of them.
Yes, well, looking at the medical evidence and looking where our hospitals are at present, we believe that we needed to extend our restrictions, which now run until the 5th of March. We will, of course, review them on the 18th of February. But at the moment, our hospitals are under incredible pressure. Thankfully, the positive case numbers are beginning to drop, which is good news. And it shows that the restrictions are working in the community. It also shows that our reproductive number in the community has also fallen below 1, which is good news as well. Very pleased with the way in which the vaccination is rolling out across Northern Ireland. As you probably know, per head of population, we're leading in the United Kingdom. So that's good news as well. But at the moment, we're under incredible pressures in our hospital, so much so that the military have provided us with some extra resource, and we're very pleased to have that coming across because that will give us some breathing space. There.
So we'll wait to see whether the review on the 18th sheds any light. But from what you're saying, Arlene, it doesn't look like it. But it's good to see that the cases are coming down. Let me ask you then about this polling that's in the Sunday Times. I mean, I wonder, first of all, how much sort of credence you give it. Northern Irish voters think there will be a united Ireland within 10 years by a margin of 48% to 44%. Many think that there's going to be a poll within the next 5. Do you see that in the opinions of people you speak to?
Well, no, I don't. And I think there is a health warning around internet polls, and this was an internet poll. It's a self-selecting poll as well, so you select into the poll. But, you know, what I find incredible from nationalist parties, whether they're in Northern Ireland or in Scotland, for that matter, is that here we are in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic when we should be using every hour that we are involved in our working day to try and deal with that and to prevent death and to protect life and to protect our National Health Service. And here we are at this very moment in time, the nationalist parties are trying to put forward the case for not only a border poll, but for constitutional change. And it's interesting, even though this is an internet poll and it is a self-selecting poll, that even with that, there isn't a majority for a united Ireland if you look at the figures. Yes, people believe that there will be a border poll, but I'm not surprised at that, given the amount of attention that there has been in the media and in commentary around all of that, so much so that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But of course,
well, I read, Arlene, that you might be minded to think, well, if there's going to be one, bring it on, and we'll win it. Is that your view? If it's going to happen, let's do it.
Well, look, I think it's absolutely reckless to be talking about a border poll at a time that we're in national crisis. Absolutely reckless. But the reality is, if there were to be one, and I think there shouldn't be because of the fact that we're dealing with a pandemic at present, if there is to be one, we will have that rational, logical conversation. And anyone that looks at it in that fashion will realise that our future is best for everybody within the United Kingdom. So I don't fear the conversation at all. But what I'm saying to you, Tom, is I would have thought that people should, in their political life and in political leadership, be looking at the real and present danger that we're currently in.
No, I would agree with you on that. I think the lots of talk in Scotland, of course, about the SNPs suggesting that they might go ahead with a border poll, a poll anyway, once the May's election results are out of the way. But just to come back, so you're happy to, and stand ready, willing, and able to make the argument about why the United Kingdom is important. I see that Michael Gove is drawing up a sort of cabinet committee to sort of convene on this. What's the best argument you think to be made for the Union, for the United Kingdom?
Well, look, there are so many different layers of argument for the Union. So for me, emotionally and culturally and politically, I am wedded to the Union. But we also look at the economic benefit there is from being the four nations being in the United Kingdom. If you look at Northern Ireland, for example, just this past year, £3 billion extra coming over to us to fight COVID. We had the furlough scheme, part of that. If we had been in the United Ireland, we certainly wouldn't have been able to avail of that. We have, of course, our National Health Service, which there isn't in the Republic of Ireland. There's no National Health Service available there. We benefited from, and I'm just using recent examples of the benefits of the Union. We have benefited from being in the UK in terms of our vaccination programme. Of course, the Republic of Ireland does not have access to the Oxford AstraZeneca yet because it hasn't been approved by the European Health Agency. Genomic sequencing, we're part of that going on in the UK because, of course, as you know, the UK carries out 40% of the world's genomic sequencing. So
actually coronavirus, in a way, the COVID response has actually brought the Union together, you think?
Well, it's a very tangible, Tom, example of how the four nations work together in a crisis and how we become even more important as four nations working together. And I know some people have wanted to use COVID. Unfortunately, Sinn Féin over here have tried to use COVID to say it shows why we should be in a united Ireland. Actually, far from it. It actually proves the point of being in the United Kingdom.
But last time there was a poll on membership of particular blocs. The campaign to remain argued from an economic standpoint, you will be poorer, you will be less secure, but never quite spoke to a feeling, an emotion, a kind of, So I wonder what it is that you think makes people feel less British or feel like the United Kingdom isn't for them. They don't feel that connection with Northern Ireland or with Scotland if they're in England. What's your sort of emotional case for the Union?
Well, in terms of the emotional case, if you look at our military service, for example, from Northern Ireland per head of population, more people sign up to our armed forces than anywhere else in the United Kingdom. So we serve and we seek to serve the UK, and that's very important to us. And we also, I know some people in England say, Northern Ireland, Scotland, perhaps even Wales is a drain on the exchequer of the United Kingdom. But actually, when you look at the benefit which Northern Ireland brings to the UK as well in terms of financial technology, cyber security, we're world leaders in those sorts of places. And look at Queen's University, the fact that it's the leading university in the UK now in terms of entrepreneurial impact. So when you look at all of the different parts of the UK and what each part brings to the table, I think it actually strengthens the Union instead of this mythical piece around a united Ireland, which of course we
Do you think it's a lack of knowledge then? Do you think it's a lack of knowledge about what the Union brings?
No, I think it's about the fact that people are getting on with their daily lives, Tom. They're doing all the things and education and working and doing all the things that are important to them. But I think it's my job, and it's the job of the government as well, to spell out the relevance of the Union to people in their everyday lives and what it means to people in their everyday lives.
And just very finally, I can't believe this is just very finally, but very finally, the impact of Brexit has meant that a lot of people in Northern Ireland feel that they're an afterthought for the United Kingdom. They're in a semi sort of status with the UK. It's had a massive effect. It's going to have a big effect on trade. If it hasn't yet, it is going to. Do you think that Brexit has changed people's views of how part of the United Kingdom they feel?
Well, you see, Brexit, and I believed in Brexit, was about taking our place on the global stage as opposed to just being constrained within the European Union and the bureaucracy and the inflexibility of that union and, of course, the lack of accountability within that union. So the whole point about Brexit was to take our place in the global world because, of course,
but Northern Ireland's place is an odd place, isn't it? Because you are kind of constrained by the European Union.
Well, I was just going to go on to that. I mean, the disappointment for those of us who believe in Brexit is because of the deal which the Prime Minister did around the Northern Ireland Protocol means that we are treated differently, and that is wrong. And we now have to work to try and deal with that, to try and say to the government, you promised that there would be unfettered access for us from GB into Northern Ireland and from Northern Ireland into GB. And therefore you need to deal with some of the problems which have presented themselves, whether that's in parcels coming from GB, whether that's in relation to cars being sold into Northern Ireland from GB. And so we're working through all of those difficulties, Tom, at present. But
yes,
we warned about the diffities of the protocol.
You did.
And unfortunately,
I remember it well.
Yeah.
I remember it well. And certainly during the Theresa May years, the DUP, you yourself were a bit of a kingmaker for her attempt at a deal. He threw you under the bus, didn't he?
Well, we certainly kept our promises to our people, but unfortunately the Prime Minister, that's a different matter. And of course we're very disappointed about that. But, we can all sit and look back at what could have been. What we now have to do is to make sure that we protect Northern Ireland within the UK and try to deal with the difficulties which the protocol has presented.
I'll let you get on with your day. Arlene Foster, thank you so much for appearing on the programme. First Minister of Northern Ireland, the leader of the DUP, and your thoughts too on this polling. A disunited kingdom, a majority-backed border polls in Scotland and Northern Ireland. The SNP set for a landslide in May. Whether you're in Scotland, Northern Ireland or Wales, how part of the United Kingdom do you feel? Is it there? Is it relevant to you in your daily lives? Or is it time that it's ended? We'll take some of your calls on that after the 12 o'clock news here on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at midday. The Health Secretary has warned it will take some time to bring coronavirus infection levels down from an incredibly high level. Matt Hancock says the government is a long way from being able to lift lockdown restrictions in place in England. Kamlesh Khunti is a professor of vascular medicine at the University of Leicester and a member of Independent SAGE. He's told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC that ministers need to be clearer about their plan.
The only thing we know is the vaccination strategy. We know what proportion of people will be vaccinated. But in terms of when the lockdown will open, the schools, the TTI, the test, trace, isolation, we don't know. The kind of things that we need is, at what point will we open up? So is it at a level of 10,000 cases a day? Those are the kind of communication that we should have.
People who've had a COVID-19 jab are being warned to avoid the risk of continuing to spread the virus. England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Professor Jonathan Van Tam, says it's not yet clear if vaccines block transmission. He's urged those who've been inoculated to follow social distancing rules. Police have issued 78 lockdown fines after breaking up an illegal rave in East London. Officers found more than 300 people at the event in Hackney early this morning. Scotland Yard says organisers padlocked the doors from the inside to stop police getting in. 11 workers trapped after an explosion in a Chinese gold mine have reportedly been rescued. The miners spent 2 weeks around 600 metres underground. Another man is believed to have died, with 10 workers still missing in Shandong province. Large parts of the UK have a dusting of snow with a number of weather warnings in place. A yellow alert is in force for an area stretching from coast to coast in southern England and ending just below Manchester. Essential travel is likely to be affected into next week. LBC News weatherman John Ketley says there's more to come.
This band of snow, which is lying across the heart of England now, is actually going to be pivoting through the next 6 hours. So it's going to be just drifting its way around the East Midlands into East Anglia and South East England and sticking exactly where it is for about 4 or 5 hours. So there will be substantial snowfall, I would think, especially to the higher grounds.
As John said, sleet and snow moving into the Midlands and South East England. Some bright spells elsewhere, but staying cold, becoming frosty later, a high of 5 Celsius. From Global's newsroom, I'm Thomas Watts.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Very good afternoon to you. Just gone 12 o'clock. You are listening to Swarbrick on Sunday here on LBC. I'm Tom Swarbrick. Hope we find you very well. If you've just joined the programme, a warm welcome to you. You may have just heard the interview with Arlene Foster, the First Minister in Northern Ireland, about this poll that's in the Sunday Times that I want to spend some time looking at, because I do think, were it not for coronavirus, my God, were it not for coronavirus, but were it not for coronavirus, the issue of the sanctity and future of the United Kingdom would be the main political discussion. There are elections taking place, in theory, in May, up in Scotland, which the SNP looks set to win a landslide, and thereby reigniting the question of whether the Westminster government would give them their their wish of having another go at a Scottish referendum. Boris Johnson is currently saying no. There are reports that the SNP may well just go for it anyway and hold a sort of wildcat referendum, which they would claim the outcome would be the one which needs to apply to Scotland. Of course, the Westminster government would say absolutely no, it doesn't. So then you get into a horrendous constitutional row. And then, of course, there's the actual impact of Brexit rather than just the Brexit vote, which will leave some of you, I suspect, in Northern Ireland feeling that you are not really part of the United Kingdom, given your special status with the deal that Boris Johnson struck, putting a border down the Irish Sea. So from both, certainly from Scotland and Northern Ireland, this is now reaching acute levels of concern. In Wales, I'm not sure whether it's the same agenda. I don't know whether the same feelings are held around whether or not the United Kingdom is beneficial to Wales. And there will be plenty of people, I think, listening in England who say, well, don't they just drain resources, some of these places, Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales? Would England not be better off being outside of the Union, being independent of them, and have more money to spend on England's priorities? If Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland get their own assemblies in which they can make decisions for themselves, why not England? Might be the view. 0345 6060 973 is my number. Let me bring you some of the results of this polling. 50% of Scots, 51% of voters in Northern Ireland want a border poll in the next 5 years. Oh, it's a surprisingly high figure in Wales, actually. 31%, really? 31% of people in Wales want a border poll. Scotland would vote for independence by a margin of 52% to 48%. Oh, come on. And in Northern Ireland, Unionists hold only a slender lead, 47% to 42% over those who wanted a united Ireland. Northern Irish voters also think there will be a united Ireland within 10 years by a margin of 48% to 44%. I wonder to what extent you think some of this is inevitable. When I say this, I mean the referenda that may come on membership of the United Kingdom. If it is going to be the case that this happens within the next 5 or 10 years, is there an argument to bring it forward and just say, OK, let's do it, let's have it out now? Given that I do think there's a good argument to be made for the United Kingdom when it comes to its coronavirus response. I know that there's a plurality of people who responded to the survey who think that individual nations could have done better on COVID if they were independent of one another. So if Scotland had been independent of the United Kingdom, it would have done better. And I find that bizarre because, of course, Scotland has the ability, all parts of the United Kingdom have the ability to come up with their own rules around health and around education. That is entirely devolved. So it's not the case that you would have done better, you would have made better health choices outside of the United Kingdom. Presumably the same health choices would have been made even if you had been independent. And I wonder to what extent that goes to a question of understanding about what the United Kingdom does, what the possibilities are even within the United Kingdom to act independently of the government in Westminster, and whether part of the solution to this is to just give more powers to the Assembly in Scotland, the Assembly in Northern Ireland, the Assembly in Wales, and maybe that's a way of resolving the question of countries becoming independent of the United Kingdom, which in my view would be a terrible thing. 0345 6060 973. We'll bring you Arlene Foster in just a moment. This is what the SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon has had to say, speaking to the BBC a little earlier, reacting to Boris Johnson's suggestion that 40 years should pass between each referendum on Scottish independence.
He's frightened of democracy. The polls now show that a majority of people in Scotland want independence. If the SNP win the Scottish election in a few months' time on a proposition of giving the people that choice, then what Democrat could rightly stand in the way of that? So Boris Johnson clearly just fears the verdict and the will of the Scottish people. I see no reason why the election should be delayed, but rightly and properly in a democracy, it shouldn't simply be a decision for government. That would be a cross-party decision. We have legislation that had recently passed to put contingency arrangements in place. We might have to do the election differently, more postal voting, for example, but I see no reason why it shouldn't go ahead at this stage. Many countries have had elections over the course of the pandemic. I want to have a legal referendum. That's what I'm going to seek the authority of the Scottish people for in May, and if they give me that authority, that's what I intend to do. Have a legal referendum to give people in Scotland the right to choose. That's democracy. It's not about what I want or about what Boris Johnson wants. It's about what the people of Scotland want, and the increasing evidence is that they want independence.
Nicola Sturgeon speaking to Andrew Marr on the BBC a little earlier this morning. If the numbers seem to be that the younger you are, the more belief you have that an independent Scotland is the right way forward. I wonder if that's the case. If it is, as Nicola Sturgeon says, the will of the people, as to whether or not Scotland is the SNP is given greater voice to its suggestion of another referendum and an independent Scotland. Is it coming from younger people in Scotland? And if so, why? Why is it that a person in their 30s or their 40s in Scotland is desperate to get out of the United Kingdom? I spoke before the news to Arlene Foster, the First Minister in Northern Ireland. I asked her how much credence she gave to this poll conducted in the Sunday Times, suggesting growing support for a united Ireland.
What I find incredible from nationalist parties, whether they're in Northern Ireland or in Scotland for that matter, is that here we are in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic, when we should be using every hour that we are involved in our working day to try and deal with that and to prevent death and to protect life and to protect our National Health Service. And here we are at this very moment in time, the nationalist parties are trying to put forward the case for not only a border poll, but for constitutional change. And it's interesting, even though this is an internet poll and it is a self-selecting poll, that even with that, there isn't a majority for a united Ireland, if you look at the figures. Yes, people believe that there will be a border poll, but I'm not surprised at that, given the amount of attention that there has been in the media and in commentary around all of that, so much so that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But of course...
Well, I read, Arlene, that you might be minded to think, well, if there's going to be one, bring it on and we'll win it. Is that your view? If it's going to happen, let's do it.
Well, look, I think it's absolutely reckless to be talking about a border poll at a time that we're in national crisis. Absolutely reckless. But the reality is, if there were to be one, and I think there shouldn't be because of the fact that we're dealing with a pandemic at present, if there is to be one, we will have that rational, logical conversation. And anyone that looks at it in that fashion will realise that our future is best for everybody within the United Kingdom. So I don't fear the conversation at all. But what I'm saying to you, Tom, is I would have thought that people should, in their political life and in political leadership, be looking at the real and present danger that we're currently in.
Arlene Foster, First Minister of Northern Ireland, speaking to me a little bit earlier on LBC. 0345 6060 973 is my number, 84850 to text. We talk more about the chances of an independent Scotland than we do about a united Ireland. Is that really something that people are starting to pick up on? Is it because, as Arlene Foster suggests, there's just more focus on it for now? And if the worry of politicians who are pro the United Kingdom is borne out through greater focus, how do you shift the focus on? Because every few years, given the Brexit deal that's just been signed, Northern Ireland will have to vote on different parts of the relationship with the European Union that England, Scotland and Wales are signed up to. That's going to keep the issue close to mind, isn't it, for a lot of people? And similarly in Scotland, the SNP are going nowhere. There's a suggestion by Sir John Curtis, the elections guru, who forecasts that there are going to be 70 of the 129 MSPs, 70 of them are going to be from the SNP party after these elections in May. They're not going anywhere. The argument's not going to disappear. It might have peaks and troughs, and at the moment it is very much at a peak. I wonder if the only way to deal with the argument is to have another referendum, squash it again. If Boris Johnson is absolutely convinced that the United Kingdom is the right thing, then let's have the argument and let's have the vote. No? 0345 6060 973. Loads of you want to get on tonight. You will jump to this morning. Loads of you will get on if you're calling from Northern Ireland or you're calling from Scotland or Wales. You will jump to the top of a very long queue this afternoon. Tom Swarbrick here, 12:15.
This is LBC.
What
Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Paul in Bedford's made his decision about the future of the Union. He texts to say, I used to consider myself as patriotic, but this government, with its Brexit and hapless management of the pandemic, has destroyed me. I'm planning to move to Scotland and campaign for independence from there, says Paul. John's in Armagh City in County Armagh. Hi there, John.
Hello, afternoon, Tom. Yes,
afternoon to you.
I think there's a big difference with this poll. It wasn't a nationalist newspaper, and it wasn't a unionist newspaper. It was a GB newspaper, which makes all the difference. And the thing is, when the Good Friday Agreement was signed, it was you could be Irish, you could be English or British, or you could be neither. Now, the Irish and the neither feel themselves more European, always have done, and I've always said that a united Ireland will not be the heart, it'll be the pocket. And as Brexit, and as it's going at the moment, if it carries on the way it's going, the differential between living in a united Ireland or living with the Great Britain is going to be cheaper with the united Ireland, the way things are going. And I think that's going to make people think long and hard.
So the status conferred on Northern Ireland by the Brexit deal means that you think life there is going to become less sort of, poorer, for want of a better phrase, and therefore people will look south and see that the riches are available as a united Ireland as opposed to United Kingdom.
Okay, fair enough. Taxes are high, maybe higher. I'll tell you what, pensions. Yeah. If I was in the south, my pension would be higher, and also the pay is higher, and also waiting lists. Okay, fair enough, you may have to pay to go and see a GP, but if the GP says you need a hip replacement, they'll get it done quicker down south than up north.
And the arguments that Arlene Foster was making about precisely that, John, about the NHS not being available to you in the Republic of Ireland, about the Barnett consequentials, about the military, about all different aspects of the United Kingdom that people can take advantage of in Northern Ireland.
Sorry, Tom. There's a neighbour of mine has just gone down to Dublin and had a knee operation down south. Now, it was actually performed by a doctor who works up north, because a lot of them actually, work both sides. And the thing, if she'd have gone through the NHS, she'd have had to wait 3 years. Now, and that's just.
But that's John, isn't that? Hang on a sec. That's an argument about the efficacy of the NHS. That's surely not a reason to just ditch the United Kingdom. I mean, you wouldn't be able to get a COVID vaccine in the south, would you?
No, not as quickly, Shannon, and that is a downfall of the approach by the EU. I mean, exactly. I'm not singing here saying the EU is all happy days, bells and whistles. I'm not saying that at all. But I tell you what, that a lot of what's good about the EU was what was brought forward by GB when they were in.
So, John, if you were offered a vote tomorrow on membership of the United Kingdom or not, which way would you vote?
Well, first thing I did when Brexit came, I got myself an Irish passport. I see myself as European, and to maintain my European citizenship, I would go for United Ireland.
All right, John, thank you very much indeed for your call. Let's get up to Scotland. Here's Gary in Glasgow. Hi there, Gary.
Yeah, hi, Tom.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
The UK government could do one of two things. It could create a situation where we've got another Northern Ireland on our doorstep, where there is practically civil war by not allowing Scotland to go its own way. Because don't forget, the United Kingdom is only about 100 years old in its present form. Ireland left about 100 years ago. And it's dysfunctional, it's not working. Or
why is it not working? In what way is it not working?
Well, I wanted to just emphasise my second point, that this would work if Scotland was independent, because you would allow Scotland to be part of a union, and Andrew Adonis has argued this on Twitter this morning, that we would have a union which is kind of federal in a way. Scotland is independent, so it sits at the table as an equal. And if a nation sits at the table as an equal, we would therefore have a stronger union.
But hang on, sorry, this is such a rose.
Things like Brexit.
This is you're saying sit round the table as a member of the European Union as an equal,
and the United Kingdom as an equal nation, as an independent nation, which Scotland has been for the majority of its history.
But it depends what you mean by independence, because Scotland would be handing over powers it actually currently has to the European Union. That's not independent. And the idea that hang on a sec, it's not. I'm sorry, it's not. Particularly as we've come out, for right or for wrong. Particularly as we've come out of the common fisheries policy. The idea that you gain independence by handing that back to the European Union, to Brussels, is rubbish. The other point is this: it's an incredibly rose-tinted view of the European Union that people around the table are treated as equals. I mean, the whole argument within the European Union at the moment centre on the fact of how powerful Germany and France are within the European Union.
Tom, no, you're wrong. It's a partnership. And we work together as a union. We are sovereign. Every country is sovereign. It's an absolute nonsense to say that you're handing in power. When Brussels decides,
well, if all countries are sovereign, if all countries are sovereign, what is the independence that you're worried about?
When you're independent, you are a sovereign nation. There's nothing wrong with that. But I thought you said we're sovereign anyway. Every country in Europe is a sovereign nation. If they simply work together, that's why the world's largest trading bloc works, because we've agreed to do changes to our laws to make it work better.
So you would rather be part of the European Union than part of the United Kingdom?
Scotland is a nation that can form partnerships, and it does it very well. And if you allow it to be independent, it will work as well as a partnership with Europe as it could with England.
I'm confused, Gary, as to what it is about the United Kingdom you think isn't working for Scotland.
Well, where do I start? Up in Peterhead, in the north of Scotland, you're seeing the decimation of the fishing industry. That's just one example. Many, many other businesses are being devastated because of Brexit. And this is something that England wanted. No other part of this United Kingdom, no other nation in the United
trade
Kingdom
barriers, as we know
Brexit.
About the trade barriers that are coming in, whether it's tariff or non-tariff barriers that would exist on trade between Scotland and England, would be, you'd have the same problem, wouldn't you? I mean, you'd have the same difficulties. If anything, the last few years have shown us how difficult it is to manage a country's extraction from a big union.
Well, I'm not saying that it would be easy. It would be better. It would be better for Scotland. We are not happy, and every poll is showing that. Tom, if you resist it, we'll create a dangerous precedent.
You think if Boris Johnson keeps saying no, then what's going to happen? The SNP will just do it anyway.
You're looking at another Northern Ireland in the Troubles on your doorstep.
Oh, come on. No, you're not.
I'm
ridiculous.
Serious. I live here. I know the strength of feeling towards Scotland being a nation again.
All right, Gary, I just don't think it's going to be anywhere on a par to what we saw in the Troubles. Thank you for your call. Text here on 84850. Tom, I've always been a firm supporter of the Union and proudly British. Unfortunately, Brexit and the hatred and division it has set loose has made the cultural differences and direction of travel between Scotland and England in opposite directions. I now believe independence for Scotland is not only inevitable, but essential for the sake of Scottish cultural identity, says Jason in West Lothian. What is Scottish cultural identity as opposed to British cultural identity? Sean's in Concert in County Durham. Hiya, Sean.
How are you doing? Arlene Foster, she's just an Irish Thatcher. Do you know that? She's horrible, that woman. I tell you what,
you're entitled to your opinion, Sean.
I am waiting for an all-Ireland. I cannot wait, mate. I cannot wait. And she knows she is petrified. If there was a referendum, because you know fine well it's going to be an all-Ireland when there's a referendum on, like.
Why would there be?
Foster, she talks out of her. Honest, she's worse than Thatcher.
Right, and you didn't think much of Thatcher, Sean. I
stand the
see.
DUP. I cannot stand them.
Right, so put your clear dislike of the DUP to one side, Sean. Why would it be right to ditch the United Kingdom for Northern Ireland?
Because it would be a better place to live. When we went over on holiday when we were kids and that, every year for when we were at school for the 3 to 4 weeks of the summer holidays, right? It was a different place, man. It was beautiful. You know, even though the Troubles was on and all that, we still went over in the 70s for our 4-week holiday. And we called it abroad, because it is abroad. This country should have nothing to do. This country should have nothing to do.
So, Sean,
with
you
Ireland.
thought Northern Ireland was a better place to go in the 70s when the Troubles were taking place than it is today?
What I'm saying is, it was
with the gangs and the bombings and the shootings and the killings, you thought Northern Ireland was a better place to go. No, but that doesn't mean it wasn't happening, Sean. Just because you didn't see it or it happened to you doesn't mean it wasn't happening. So you still believe Northern Ireland was a better place in the 1970s than it is today?
It will be a better place now. I'm saying, fair enough, all right, I made a mistake, right? It was kind of bad over there, right? But we still went out over for our 4 weeks holidays, you know what I mean, every year. But at the end of the day, I cannot see any problem with an All Ireland. I'm hoping. I love the Irish people, and the people that call themselves
and
British
to those in North,
it's wrong.
Yeah.
It's wrong. Wait, of course it's not.
Well, if you go to Northern Ireland and you see when you drive around Northern Ireland and you see the British flags flying from all parts, I mean, it's amazingly patriotic in a sense. You think it's horrible?
I think it's horrible that there's British flags in Northern Ireland.
Why?
Because it should be all one.
But why can't it be British?
But you're either Irish or you're British. There's no, you can't be both.
No, but no.
Sean, you think the people in Ireland want to be proud to be Irish because
Some clearly don't, Sean. Quite a lot of people clearly do not wish to be part of Ireland.
To me, that's sad. It's just bringing politics into it. It's sad that they kind of call themselves...
Because previously there's been no politics in it.
They kind of call themselves proper Irish.
Sean, I think you've been snow blinded here, mate. It's all going wrong. Thank you very much for your call. 0345 6060 973 is the number. 84850 to text. You can tweet at LBC. We'll cross to Israel in a little bit after the news headlines to get the view from Israel's former coronavirus czar, appointed by the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in July last year, about how Israel is dealing with its vaccination rollout and concerns about the gap between the doses that England, the UK, is now relying upon to get those first doses to more people. We'll speak to Professor Ronnie Gamzu in just a few moments. Tom Swarbrick here, 12:30. News headlines now. Here's Tim Humphrey.
Health Secretary Matt Hancock has warned England is a long way from an end to lockdown measures. One of his predecessors, Lord Lansley, told LBC the coronavirus restrictions could last until May. £15,000 worth of fines have been issued to people found at an illegal rave in East London. More than 300 people attended the event in Hackney, which was broken up early this morning. Heavy snows causing problems in some parts of the country. Some journeys are being disrupted and 4 COVID vaccination centres have had to close in South Wales. The weather, sleet and snow in the Midlands and South East England. Some bright spells elsewhere, but remaining cold, a high of 5.
This is LBC. This is LBC Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
We'll come back to your calls on the future of the Union in just a few moments' time, but I'm delighted to say that we're joined on the programme by Professor Ronnie Gamzu, who was Israel's coronavirus czar between July and October 2020. He's the CEO of the Tel Aviv Sourasky Medical Centre and a former Director General of Israel's Health Ministry. Great to have you on the programme this afternoon, Professor. Thank you for being there for us. Let's start out with the vaccine effort undertaken by Israel, which is world-leading. How has it been so successful?
First, I believe that the framework and the logistics and the distribution of all the organizations that are responsible for giving the vaccine and their, mutual and any-day relationship with our people, the sick funds and the hospitals, we are a healthcare system that is not fragmented. It's very solid. So the communication in between healthcare organizations and people that are insured by them is very tight. And by this you build trust.
So the better communication, better data sharing, perhaps, between the organisations in Israel, something that the NHS could perhaps learn a lot from. Although I wonder what your view from Israel of the UK's vaccine rollout is.
I believe there should be another link in the puzzle. A lot of trust building with the opinion leaders of the healthcare system. They must appear more in the media. They must appear more on the digital and the social networks in order to build the trust. Giving information and doing the communication with the public about this vaccine is not so easy, but you have to have really all your efforts and all the great physicians, scientists, opinion leaders within the healthcare system in front. This is their task. Nurses as well.
One of the changes the UK made to its vaccine rollout early on was to swap from giving people 2 doses to giving as many people as possible the first dose and then waiting to have the second one. Now, I understand the gap between the dosages in Israel is 3 weeks. In the UK, for Pfizer, it's up to 12 weeks. Does that make sense to you?
It makes sense only when you have shortage of vaccines and you have a growing disease, and when the epidemic is still solid and very active. And this is what's happening in the UK. There's a shortage of the vaccines and the epidemic is still there and it's very active and dynamic. So the studies of Pfizer were mentioning and took 21 days apart between the vaccines. 21 days is not a sacred time frame. It's not the only time frame. And we know that vaccine can achieve better results with a booster, but the booster should not be only 21 days apart. So 28 days, it's with Moderna. So once you have shortage of vaccine, it is reasonable to have such kind of postponement of the second one. Whether it's 12 weeks or 10 weeks or 6 weeks, it's really almost a gamble.
You think the UK is gambling here, but if the shortage of vaccination means that the gap has to be extended, is that not a punt that the UK has to take?
Yeah, but I guess they do not have any choice but to do such a gamble and such, a reasonable gamble. It's not without any evidences. We know about the effectiveness of vaccines, other vaccines. So 21 days, it's not the only possibility, 3 weeks. So if you take 3 weeks or 12 weeks, or in between 6 to 10, we really do not have solid evidence to support this or this. 3 weeks is only what was mentioned officially by the studies.
Right. I spoke to Israel's ambassador to the UK back in March, when on the day that Israel decided to put travellers coming into Israel into quarantine, into hotels. And I remember saying to him, my gosh, you've just killed your travel industry. And he said, well, yes, but we need to put the health of our citizens first. The UK is now considering, nearly a year later, putting people who arrive into this country into hotels to quarantine them for 10 days. What was the science that led to Israel taking that decision back in March 2020?
I believe even before that, at the end of January, 27 in January, I had a discussion with the official, the Ministry of Health here in Israel, of closing the flights from China. And then within 3 weeks, we also closed the flights from Italy. So we, almost an island country, we must protect our borders on such occasion. But the motivation to make it more solid and to enhance the closure comes with the new mutation, comes with the new strains and the variability of the viruses. And you see that measure is being enforced more and more strictly all around the world, also in Israel. Israel now is considering closing the sky for 2 weeks, total closure. And this may be all because of the mutation. Governments and the officials are afraid, in my belief, too much of, mutation invasion, but I can understand their fear.
There's so much we could talk about. There's some building works, I think, going on that is making it tough. But let me ask you very, very finally, because I must really, what responsibility morally and on a health question do you think Israel should have to the Palestinians when it comes to vaccinating or helping to vaccinate Palestinians?
I believe we are one area. We are a stronger country with more and more relationship, with more and more influence, with more capabilities. This is a time of a war against the virus. When you are in the state of a war against the virus, there should not be enemies. You have to make possible also and to make it affordable as well for your neighbors, because you know what? Every day, 100,000 Palestinians are coming from the Palestinian territories to work in Israel. And you know what? The borders between Israel and the Palestinian Authority is not a solid border. It's a border that people are coming in and out. Of course, Arab Israelis. It's all one area and one group, one community. We have to take more care of them.
Really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Professor Ronnie Gamzu is Israel's former coronavirus czar. He is the CEO of the Tel Aviv Sourasky Medical Center, former Director General of Israel's Health Ministry. Really interesting to speak to him, particularly about the vaccine rollout, the gap between the two vaccinations, but also on the science. Again, I keep coming back to it. I've got a real sort of thing about it at the moment. This time last year, NervTag were telling the Department for Health, no, we don't think border screening is all that effective. Once it's here, it's here. It wouldn't really do anything. And that was in January 2020. I think we get it. In June, it wouldn't have been effective because the virus is here. What are you protecting the country from? It's already in. But back then, that was the time to go down very hard on the border. In Israel, that happened in the early, sort of middle of March, happened in countries all across the world, in Australia and New Zealand, and yet Britain took a different view. The scientists took a different view, and it's always been slightly inexplicable, that. Let's come back to your calls on the border polls that may or may not be happening in the coming years. Kevin is in Attleborough in Norfolk. Oh, no, Glenn's in Belfast. Hi there, Glenn.
Hi.
Hi.
I've just been listening, and I think that my opinion is, yes, if there's a border poll and it goes United Ireland, then it is what it is, but that's democracy. But the thing is, I don't think it would be better, for the simple fact is I feel that there would still be quite a lot of trouble and we have a fantastic health service here in the NHS.
Is it almost at the stage, Glenn, where it's almost too toxic a question to ask people in the form of a vote? A United Ireland?
I think so, but I do think that there are a lot more people now leaning towards the border poll, but I just don't think it would be any better in regards to the trouble. I still think there would be a lot of trouble in the north.
I think, unfortunately, I think that history tells us that you may well be right. Glenn, thank you so much for your call. I do worry too about, I see Michael Gove is putting together a big sort of cabinet committee about what to do regarding questions of the union. So worried is the government about it. And whether they learn from the Remain campaign, which argued from an economic point, from a security point, from a defence point about the reason why we should stay in the European Union. But Vote Leave had a much stronger emotional argument. And I just wonder whether they're worried about repeating the same mistake. What is the emotional argument to remain British, to remain part of the United Kingdom? Because you can talk all you like about, the NHS, the military, the pound, whatever it is. But people will still find reasons to say, no, I just don't feel very British. And if you are someone that doesn't feel British, where did that go? And is there an argument that can persuade you to feel it again? 0345 6060 973 is the number. We'll talk in a few moments too about the viability of the Olympic Games this summer. Cancelled, postponed last year. They're due to come around July, August this year. We've got the Euros potentially as well, something maybe to look forward to, but will it be able to go ahead? We'll speak to Sir Hugh Robertson, the chair of the British Olympic Association, in just a few moments. Tom Swarbrick here, 12:46.
Coming up at 1 on LBC, Majid Nawaz.
Local councils will be quietly given the power to extend lockdown rules until July, while schools will remain shut until Easter. Do we need more clarity around when this will all end?
Majid Nawaz on LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster on LBC.
Afternoon to you, 12:49 is the time. Continue to take your calls on the issue of the union. I know some of you want to get in touch too about lockdown and the measures that we're all going to have to live under for, I'm afraid, many months to come, it looks like. And it may well be that coronavirus restrictions have an impact on those things that we were looking forward to this summer. Certainly I was looking forward to them anyway. The Euro football, the competition that is due to take place, having been postponed last year, that is going to happen this summer, as well as the Olympic Games, of course, which were due to happen last summer but have been postponed until this. And there are questions now about whether those games can go ahead at all, or indeed whether they could go ahead but with no spectators at the stadia in Japan in order to stop it becoming some sort of super spreader event. Sir Hugh Robertson is the chair of the British Olympic Association and former Minister for Sport and the Olympics during the 2012 London Games. I wonder how confident you are that the Olympics will indeed go ahead this summer.
I'm as confident as I possibly can be, and that confidence is based on the discussions we've been having over the last week. We have spoken actually individually in the last week to the Tokyo Organising Committee, to the IOC, indeed the president of the IOC with whom I spoke on Friday, and in consultation with other major national Olympic committees around the world. I mean, we've spoken to the United States, to Canada, to Australia, to New Zealand, to our friends in Europe. Without exception, everybody is planning for these games to go ahead. The question is how they go ahead and how you keep them safe and secure.
And I guess if we're going to do this, then the idea of having spectators in feels difficult right now. Is your expectation that there won't be any spectators?
I think it's too early to say, is the honest answer to that, Tom. The Japanese, when asked that question, have said they intend to make a decision on that in the spring. I think they could probably realistically leave it till May. It's not a sort of binary question, of course, because you could have everything from limited local spectators to the sort of, the full free-for-all we're used to at normal Olympic Games. I mean, frankly, I don't think that's very likely, if I'm honest. I suspect there are going to be some restrictions, but the key thing is that they need to they need and want to stage the games. The athletes are desperate for the games to be staged. So the top priority in all of this is the athletes, and then you work back from there.
I've read reports that the head of the Tokyo Organising Committee has apparently ruled out the idea of having no fans at the Olympics, not least because that's how the money tends to be made. Are you having to push quite hard at the idea of having the Olympics with no fans, or is just getting the games on in some form the key aim?
Getting the games on in some form is the key aim, and it's not for us as the British Olympic Association to tell the Tokyo Organising Committee how to run the games. And I know from my own experience as the Olympics Minister here in 2012, you're right, ticketing is a very considerable chunk of the revenue for the organising committee, but it's not the only chunk. And of course, the IOC make a lot of money from their broadcast commitments. So what we don't know, if the Japanese organising committee run into trouble, is how much money the IOC might grant them from their broadcast deal. So there are a number of different ways you could cut this cake. What everybody is focusing on at the moment is not the debate we're having here, which appears to be whether the game should take place or not. That is not the debate in Olympic circles. The debate is how you stage the games in a safe and secure way.
Which is, of course, the debate that should happen anyway, because the desire from you guys is that you want this to happen. And I think for many people who would love to see some serious sport take place over the summer, it would be great to see them happen too. I guess the problem is one of persuasion of people closer to the time. And again, particularly the Japanese people. A survey in Japan said that 80% of the Japanese people are against having the Olympics there for fears it being a super spreader event, even with the thousands of athletes that could be descending on Tokyo to take part in it.
I'm sure that's absolutely right. I mean, can I just sort of go back a moment? When you said that we want the games to take place, that is absolutely right, we do. But we want those games to take place because of our athletes. And if you speak to the athletes in Team GB, remember that the life cycle of an Olympic athlete in some sports can be very long. They can do 4 or 5 games. In some sports, it's very, very short indeed. And this is the moment for a number of athletes. So, there's huge pressure from them to go to Tokyo and compete. And they get very unsettled when people who don't know anything about it, who are not close to the conversations, start chucking their 5 penny worth into the ring and saying that the games may be cancelled. if you look at, we asked the Japanese during the call during the week about the survey, and they were actually very straightforward about it. They said, we're right in the middle of a lockdown in Tokyo at the moment. Part of the reason we're having that lockdown now is to get a grip of this early, precisely, presumably, though they didn't say it, to provide the space for events later on in the summer. They said, if you're in the middle of a lockdown and you ask people whether you want to welcome hundreds and thousands of people to your city in the middle of a lockdown, you're going to get a fairly obvious response. So, in a sense, the survey doesn't tell us anything. And what the second point they made was that the sentiment that comes through very clearly behind the survey is that the Japanese people do want the games to take place. They were just asked one very specific question in the middle of the lockdown. So it may have given us a slightly unrealistic answer, and it may be a product of when you ask the question. Yeah. The commitment from both the Japanese government nationally, from the state government in Tokyo, and from the organising committee could not be clearer. They are absolutely all guns blazing to stage this event in a safe and secure way in July and August.
Well, let us hope that it can go ahead with full spectators everywhere and people having a great time. So, Hugh, thank you so much. Hugh Robertson, chair of the British Olympic Association, former Minister for Sport and the Olympics during the 2012 London Games. Oh, for that time when we could just go and celebrate a British success at the Olympics, or indeed, do you remember the sort of the fan parks for the last World Cup, and England would score and the beer would go absolutely everywhere. God, I don't know if it's going to happen this summer. I have to say, I feel pretty down about it. Jeff's in Carmarthen in Wales on this subject of independence. Jeff, hi there.
Hello, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Yeah, my feeling is that if Scotland and Ireland do become independent, then there is a very strong case for Wales being given a referendum and a choice on which direction they wish to go. So a lot of
is there really though, Jeff? Is there really a strong independent streak in Wales? I mean, I see the polling says 31%.
Yes, there is. I mean, I think this is linked a lot to do with Welsh language, which is the fastest growing language in Europe now. Welsh schools have been very, very successful. People want to get their kids into Welsh-speaking schools, and they're getting great results. I mean, my grandson started nursery, and they taught him he started to learn how to count in Welsh, and he's been teaching me. So that's pretty good. My partner speaks fluent Welsh, so obviously I know the Welsh community well around here. And yes, I do think so. Very much, Welsh has a very individual culture. Art is very important. Music is very important. This big thing, we play in a band, and obviously we've been stopped from being able to tour now because of the new Brexit rules. So if suddenly Scotland open up and they're saying, if we go through Scotland, we can do all our dates that we were doing out in Sweden and what have you. This is important to us. So I think the choice needs to be given to Wales. At the moment, if that referendum was held tomorrow, I don't think it would vote independent.
No.
But
I have to say, Jeff,
go and Ireland, that may well change. And we're seeing the effects of Brexit. What's going to happen to Welsh lamb once all these carnets get put on it?
But Jeff, the question about farming, of course, is going to impact Wales because there are lots of sheep farmers in Wales. But it's also going to affect the whole of the United Kingdom. So it's a question that needs a resolution for the whole country, not just for Wales. But I take your point.
I can't believe. I mean, the EU offered in their deal, they offered mutual for EU bands coming here, and we love having German bands, Dutch bands, great, and there's a great tradition of music swapping here in Wales. And I just can't understand why they blocked it.
Well, the government say that. I mean, I know it's a slightly separate, but they're talking about if the Erasmus scheme has gone, which it has, they're going to create a sort of global scheme that might take in more countries. But I get, Jeff. Listen, if it's impacted your life and it's impacted your life negatively, you're not going to like it. Obviously. Thank you for your call. I want to get Jeff. Sorry, we've got to move to Kevin, who's in Attleborough just before the news at 1. Hiya, Kevin.
Hi. My question is, where do airport arrivals live? I mean, everybody else is instructed to stay at home. Where do they live? I mean, even if they go into these hotels, where are they going to go after the hotels? Do they live in this country? Do they live in some other country?
Well, I don't know. They live where they live, don't they? I mean, what does it matter?
Well, if everyone else is instructed to stay at home, these people are disobeying the rules by not staying at home, aren't they? That's the clear point, isn't it?
If travel is possible. Overseas travel is possible at the moment for a number of different reasons.
Such as?
In order to prevent people bringing in that spread as and when things maybe open up a bit, isn't clamping down at the border one of the places where you're going to have to hit very hard to stop any new variants coming in?
Well, exactly. You know, this is the kind of thing that happened in the likes of Australia and New Zealand, isn't it?
Yep.
That they actually put a hard stop on this happening at the outset.
Yeah, they did, and I don't understand, Kevin, as I mentioned before, why the science view on efficacy at the border hasn't shifted from January last year when they said it would be ineffective right up until right now when they still say, some scientists, that it wouldn't be effective. Kevin, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for all your calls. I'm back with you tomorrow night, 10 p.m, Monday, 10 p.m, on LBC. You can listen again to any of this programme if you missed any of it. Global Player is available to you. And, of course, you can listen live to LBC, where at 4 it will be Ian Payne. Right now, Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Tom. Coming up, a 16-year-old French girl known only as Mila has inadvertently found herself in a major national row around blasphemy in Islam. She's received up to 50,000 death threats for one ill-advised remark. Is social media mob justice out of control? Before that, we'll be discussing the fact that schools may be closed until the Easter holidays, with children probably not returning until after the summer. But first, the British government has quietly extended lockdown laws for local councils in England until July the 17th. And I'm asking, does the government need to set clearer and better expectations around when lockdown will be eased?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 1 o'clock, people who've had a COVID-19 vaccine are being warned to avoid the risk of continuing to spread the virus. England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Professor Jonathan Van Tam, says it's not yet clear if vaccines block transmission. He's urging those who've had a jab to still follow social distancing rules. Dr. Alison Pittard, the Dean of the Faculty of Intensive Care Medicine, told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC it's right that everyone continues to follow the rules.
Although we